He had been called into Ned's solar not long after arriving at Winterfell and handed a letter that had been written by Cat. Reading it, he was surprised to see his niece had basically given her blessing for Ned to marry again. Sure, she hadn't explicitly said so, but it was clear from her words that she meant that. Handing the letter back, he looked to his good nephew, or was that former good nephew. This changes things between me and your family, Brendan. But I hope not between us, Ned said, looking back at him, his eyes focused on his face. I cannot say I'm not a little saddened by this, Ned, but my niece has made her choice, and I see it as no fault of yours. I thank you for that, Brendan. I feel, though it's time we had a conversation that's long overdue. Ned said, and Brendan wondered where he was going with this. Very well. Cat, Brendan, she and your nephew, I believe you know what they tried to do, Ned said, and then raised his hand when Brendan went to interrupt. I know, Brendan, that you were not a part of, nor played any role in any of it whatsoever. They are my kin, Ned. I know, he said, embarrassed, not at his admission, but at what they'd done. I suspected it with Cat, gods I didn't wish to, but I suspected it all the same. She and Petter Baelish had shared letters, the things he said to her regarding Jon. Whether she'd always have hated the boy anyway or not, those letters only helped fuel that hatred. Ned said, and Brendan thought about asking to see the letters but thought better of it. I never knew they'd kept in touch, he said, and Ned snorted. Would that were all it was. Each time we'd hear of what Jon did, what he accomplished, things would get worse between Cat and I. My not wishing to punish the lad for what she saw as him trying to make a name for himself in order that he could take Winterfell. At first, that was it, and whether it was just this fear or her hatred of the boy, I can't be certain. Only that it festered Brendan and I couldn't cut the wound out. Ned said sadly, She sent me letters in the Vale, demanded I do something about the lad. I'd seen him but the once in Lannisport, and that boy would never take Winterfell. He'd never try. Brendan said and saw the soft smile on Ned's face. When he came back here, gods, Brendan, to see him with Sansa, Arya, even Robb, he showed me how far I'd let my family slip. He, a boy of 10 name days, showed me and Cat hated him even more for it. The fosterings was his idea, did you know? I didn't, Brendan said. Aye, they were. He even suggested taking Bran as his squire, though once again, Cat saw danger where there was none. She argued with me on the fostering about Bran, though I'm glad he's squiring with you, Ned said. He watched as Ned grabbed a small mug and took some ice from it, placing it into larger mugs before he then poured ale over it and handed him one of the mugs. Brendan glad of the cool drink even this far north. That was his idea, Ned said, smiling. Ice? He asked. To use it for this, for storing food. We're shipping it around Westeros and off into Essos. Wintertown, Bear Island, White Harbor. Most of my bannermen are benefiting because of Jon. You heard what he did with his winnings in King's Landing, Ned asked. No, he gave them up to feed the poor Brendan, convinced the Tyrells to match it. I've spoken to some of those who've come north from Flea Bottom. You should listen to what they say of him. Ned set his pride clear. He's a good lad, Ned, he said. Then why did your niece and nephew try to have him killed? Ned said angrily, slamming his hand on the table. I don't know, Ned. I only found out after, and even then I couldn't be certain. So I warned them and, well, forgive me, Brendan. There's nothing to forgive. There's more I need to speak to you on, but now is not the time, Brendan. Things are going to change. You need to be aware of this, Ned said. After he left, he got an ominous feeling about the last words Ned had spoken and found himself in the Sept in Wintertown praying for the first time in many years. The lad himself arrived surprisingly for the wedding, and Brendan watched as he spent time with his family, with the Tyrell girl and how happy he seemed at the wedding itself. When Bran asked him to stay a while longer, he did, and they were in the process of getting ready to actually leave when things changed dramatically. First, Ned came to see him once more, this time basically to tell him that Bran couldn't leave with him and that if he wished he could stay with him. "Why, Ned?" he asked. "I need my son here. There must always be a Stark in Winterfell, and it falls to Bran." Ned said, "So this isn't about me?" He asked, worried that over time, Ned had decided to take his grandnephew from him. "You and I are on good terms, Brynden. I hold you no more responsible for your family than I hold Jon for how they think of him. But things are about to change, and I wish I could give you more. But stay, listen, and we'll talk." Ned said, "Very well." He did as he was asked, and to say things were changing was an understatement of epic proportions. First came news from King's Landing, the king calling the banners, and Brynden, if it hadn't been for Bran, would have mounted up and ridden off. The Knights of the Vale would ride, and it was his place to ride by their side, to ride for his king. Yet he felt that he was the only one who felt that, as Ned didn't seem to be keen to rise for Robert, and he wondered why that was. He killed the queen and her boy, claimed her an adulteress, and the boy a bastard. Now apparently he seeks her other son and daughter's head and intends to march on Casterly Rock. He heard one of the guards say, "He wishes us to rise against the West." The other asked, "He may wish it. I don't think he'll see it fulfilled." The first guard said, "The White Wolf." The other said, and both men chuckled, "The White Wolf? Jon Snow? Would they not rise against the West because he was a hostage?" No, Jaime Lannister doted on the lad, by all accounts thought him family. He'd not make him a hostage. Then what? Was it that they were more allied with the West than Robert? Surely not. Ned Stark cared not for coin, and Robert was as close to a brother to the man as could be. With Jon Arryn involved also, the North would have to rise for them, wouldn't they? He was pleased to see the banners called, feeling that he'd be able to ride with them to meet up with the Knights of the Vale. Though more and more news had come from King's Landing, Robert's rage. It was being called, and Brynden was disgusted by what he heard. Beating a boy to death in front of his mother, killing servants and guards alike, putting their heads on spikes to show off what you'd done. He liked it not, and it was clear that Ned Stark and some of the lords who'd arrived felt the same way too. "Uncle Brynden." Bran called, and he turned to look at the lad, ready to start their day's sparring. "You ready, Bran?" he asked, and the boy nodded. This at least allowed his mind some rest, made him feel somewhat content in the changed world he now found himself in. His charge was coming along well martially, and in his studies was diligent, apart from a brief time when he seemed distracted and upset. So much so that Brynden had gone to Ned and found out the reason why. He'd actually argued with the man over telling him. The idea of the boy knowing such things about his mother, not one he agreed with. "I'll keep no secrets from my children, none that are mine to tell anyway." Ned said cryptically, "You'll make him hate his mother." He said angrily, "I'd give him leave to make his own mind up, but at least he'll know who she is. Brynden, you'll know the truth of her." He'd not agreed with Ned, but Bran had seemed to get over it, and had even asked after his mother once or twice, so he accepted it and moved on. He began once again to concentrate on his own work with the boy. They were finishing their spar when Jory Cassell walked over, the man's usually smiling face replaced by a far more serious one. "Lord Bran, I believe your father wishes to speak to you." "Sir Brynden a word," Jory said. And Bran looked to him, and Brynden nodded to him, allowing him to run off. "Jory?" "A meeting's been called for tonight, Sir Brynden. Lord Stark has asked everyone to attend," Jory said. "Everyone?" he asked. "Aye, all the lords, their most trusted men." "Everyone," Jory said before walking away. Standing in the godswood later that night, he wished these were his gods, that he could, as he'd seen countless Northmen do, just come and kneel and pray to this damn tree. He'd seen the peace that came over them when they did so, and they'd rise after prayer as if their worries were no more. For Brynden, though, he couldn't remove his worries. He couldn't even begin to. Jon Snow was a lie and his family was fucked. That the lad may not be vengeful and cared for his siblings may be all that let them keep their heads. This war was a foregone conclusion. The forces against Robert were far too large. The north, west to reach, the loyalists' houses and those who turned back to the dragons as soon as they knew Rhaegar's son lived. He could see it clearly, and there was nothing to be done about it, something which filled him with anger and despair. "You have questions," he heard Ned's voice from behind him, turning to see the man and the gray wolf that was almost always by his side. "You could have told her, Ned," he said bitterly. "Could I? To what end? She hated him." "Brendan, nothing would have changed that. Given the letters she shared with Baelish, she'd have told him, and then what? Would he have kept it to himself, or would Robert have marched here to take his life? Would he have sent assassins as he did after his family? Would he have come under false pretenses and I'd have had to watch as more of my family died because he couldn't face the truth?" Ned said, his voice soft, but his anger clear. "Had she known," Brendan said. "Then she'd have loved him like he was her own, and all would have been well. Do you think I've not thought that? That I've not been where you are? The truth of the matter is, she wouldn't have changed. Instead of thinking him a bastard threat to our children, she'd have thought him a threat based on his blood. Only she'd have had a way to see him gone, Brendan, a way to see him dead. Tell me truly, do you think she'd have used it?" He said nothing, looking instead at the white bark of the tree and shaking his head. Everything Ned said made sense, and yet he felt his anger and annoyance rise, his worry for his kin, for his friends in the Vale. What will he do with them? "I don't know, Brendan. Kat is his brother's mother, his sister's mother, and Jay Harry's loves his family. He'll not see her dead. Edmure, I truly can't say, though. At best it'll be the wall. Your house will end. Brendan, the Tully name no more, though the line will live on with Bran as Lord of Riverrun." Ned said, "Lord Paramount?" he asked, and Ned shook his head. "No. What am I to do?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I cannot tell you. Only you know what's right for you. Bran will need you, Brendan. He's the last hope for your blood, if not your house. Isn't that why you came here?" Ned said, turning to walk away. His sleep was troubled that night, unsurprisingly, little things he'd seen and dismissed coming back to him now. He'd recognized it in Jon Snow. He knew that now, recognized the father and the son, and yet not made the connection. As he sat up in the bed and dressed, he began to laugh, Sir Richard's words running through his head. "You fought on the wrong side once, Brendan. Even now you don't know the truth of it. Family, duty, honor, all come into play, not just one. The dragons will return. You should try to be sure to be on their good side when they do. I wish you good fortune in your travels, Brendan. May the road you find be the right one." He broke his fast with his grandnephew and stood up, motioning to the boy to join him, walking from the hall to the sparring yard. Once there, he grabbed the swords and handed one to Bran, looking to the boy and noticing his nervous expression. "Come, Bran, we must practice. You're to be lord while your father is away, and we won't have as much time to do this then," Brendan said. "We?" Bran asked. "Aye, we. You think I'd leave you here all alone," he said with a chuckle. "No," Bran said, smiling now. As the spar began, Brendan too began to smile. Bran was his family. To prepare him for the life he had ahead of him was his duty, and to raise him to be a true knight would redeem their honor. The North 297 AC, Arthur. He tried not to laugh, truly he did, but to find someone less comfortable on a dragon's back than himself was funny to him. So when they landed in the wide open fields just south of the Neck, Arthur found himself laughing at how quickly Loras dismounted. His youngest brother now off stretching his legs while Arthur and the king shook their head as Ghost woke up. The wolf had actually slept through the flight, and Arthur found himself a little jealous of him for it. Looking at his king, Arthur was glad they'd not landed near the Trident. He, Barristan and Jaime had all found it hard to look at the armor Jay wore and not think of his father. The color, the rubies on the chest, that it was Valyrian steel was the only thing which marked it as not being Rhaegar's actual armor, though Jay explained that was the point. Let him think me a specter from the past. Let them believe my father has come again. It's in his name I seek justice, his and my mother's. Your family? No, they deserve far more than justice. Sir Arthur, they deserve far more than vengeance. For them, I intend to bring Robert and Jon Arryn a reckoning. Jay said determinedly. After stretching their legs and drinking some water, they climbed back up on Rhaenix's back, Ghost once again putting them to shame with how easily he managed it. Within a heartbeat, they were flying once again, and as they flew over the twins, Jay pointed down, Arthur looking to see no assembly of men just as Jay had predicted. He smiled when they flew over Seaguard and they saw the three-headed dragon flying high, House Mallister having declared for the true king, it seemed. Soon, Winterfell was in sight, and Jay flew Rhaenix once again into the Wolfswood, landing where they had before, and while he, Loras, and Ghost dismounted, Jay stayed a little longer before he did likewise, walking to the dragon's head to speak to his sister and bid her farewell. The walk to the keep took only a few minutes, and Loras asked Jay why he hadn't just landed there with the dragon. I need to let them know first, Loras. If they see her coming out of the sky, it'll create a panic. Let's save that for Robert, Jay said with a laugh, and Arthur smirked as they reached the gate. The banners had been called and answered, and he looked to see them readying to march, though one by one men stopped to look as Jay walked by. His armor marked him out, and though he held the helm in his hand, the crown he wore would leave no doubt it was not Jon Snow who'd arrived here today, but Jaehaerys Targaryen. Yet in all of that, it was Ghost that most people focused on, the White Wolf adding to their number and looking like he was wearing his own white cloak to match his and Loras's. I've come to see my uncle. Is he in the keep? Jay asked one of the guards. Harwin. He believed the man was named if he was right. He's in the God's Wood with some of the other lords, your grace, the man said, and Jay nodded. Walking through the grounds, he imagined how impressive a sight they made. Jay armored and crowned, Dark Sister on his hip, with Ghost wailing beside him at the other. Loras, with his armor shined and glistening and his white cloak flowing behind him. Arthur with Dawn on his back, pinning his white cloak down. People bowed and nodded, and what had been a hive of activity when they entered was now almost at a standstill, and Arthur was glad to see the gates which led to the Godswood up ahead of them. Jon. A voice called out, and both he and Loras turned to see the young boy running towards the king. Bran, I hope to see you, Jay said, smiling at his brother. Jon, father said. He said you're the king now, that you're Rhaegar's son, not his, Bran said when he reached his brother, Arthur watching as Jay took a knee to be at his brother's height. I wish to tell you myself, Bran. Truly, I just never got the time I hoped for, Jay said sadly. Does this mean... Jeer, are you not my brother now? Bran said, his voice barely a whisper. Do you wish me to be your brother? Jay asked, and the boy nodded vigorously. Then I'm your brother, now and always. He watched as the two embraced each other for a moment or two, Jay whispering something in Bran's ear, and the boy running off to where an older man stood. Arthur finding the way he looked at the king troublesome, until Jay explained it as they moved closer to the gate. The Blackfish, my brother's squiring for him, Jay said. Do you think him a danger? Loras asked. He's an honorable man, Jay said. And Arthur nodded as they walked into the Godswood itself. He didn't really have too many dealings with the Blackfish. The man had been a bit older than him and more a friend of Barristan's than his, but he was an honorable man, and while he'd no doubt take issue with Jay over his family, any attack from him would be head-on and not from the back. As he looked at Ghost and watched Jay give the White Wolf a nod, he saw Jay smile when he saw him run off. 2 gray wolves soon coming into view along with the lords and Ned Stark. Your Grace, Ned Stark said as he saw Jay. "Uncle, my lords, my lady," Jay said. And Arthur looked to the other lords. All in all, there were 8 people at the weirwood. Some he knew: Lord Wyman, the Great John and Lady Mage, and Lord Jorah. Some he did not: a pale lord, a large gray-bearded man, and another younger man. "Your Grace," most of them said once they'd seen him and he watched as some went to take a knee, Jay waving them to stand. "We had not expected you, Your Grace," Ned said. "I know. I felt I had to come, Uncle. No doubt there are questions about me, my plans, and our allies. It's better to address any concerns early, and there's something I wish you all to see." "We'll go inside. I'll call a meeting of the lords and ladies," Ned said. Arthur saw as Ned and the others looked to the king's armor, to his bearing. As they looked at him and Laura's and what they wore, Mage Mormont's eyes glistening when she saw Dawn on his back, while then looking to see the sword Jay carried, they walked from the godswood, and as they were passing a wooden door, Jay stopped, looking to it before turning to his uncle. "Uncle, I'll pay my respects and meet you inside," Jay said. And Ned nodded. Arthur, realizing now where they were going and feeling nervous about it, the statues they passed all held swords in their hands. Some were old, and as they walked, they quickly came to the 3 newest ones. He'd never met Rickard Stark, but he could see the family resemblance to his sons. Brandon? He had, and he felt the statue maker had done a decent job in creating his likeness. With Lyanna, though, he failed miserably, and the statue looked very little like her. It was lifeless, and she was anything but. He closed his eyes and said a small prayer, and when he opened them, Jay was standing in front of the statue. Whatever Jay said was between him and Lyanna, and so he moved back and bid Loras do the same. Both of them watching, while Jay whispered something before he reached under his armor and took out something soft and blue, laying it in the statue's hands. "I love you, Mother." He heard Jay say as he turned, and they began to walk from the crypt. He and Loras walked behind him, and as he looked back he saw the blue rose lying in Lyanna's hands, smiling as he realized that Jay had gotten one made that would never wilt. Arthur closed his eyes and made his own promise before they left, one he begged the gods that he would be able to keep, for Rhaegar, for Lyanna, and for their son. Riverrun 297 AC. Cat. Each day it became even clearer just how desperate their situation was. Their main houses had abandoned them. Their largest bannermen weren't just not answering the call, but they had, if the scouts were to be believed, and she had no doubt they were, joined their banners to the Dragon One. Once again she cursed Jon Snow, for that's who he was, as he was surely no dragon prince. He couldn't be. She'd have known if he was, and all his life he had shown himself to be anything but true. While she'd reluctantly accepted that he was in fact the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, she'd not accept they'd married. No, the boy was a bastard still, a Snow, though her mind screamed Blackfry to her, and her fears rose again. It was Daemon Blackfire that she'd used in her mind as an example of why bastards couldn't be trusted, why they should be feared and kept away from their true-born kin. That it turned out that Jon Snow was another black dragon didn't comfort her or make her feel any better, though it made her hate Ned, which was something that up to now she had not been able to do. He knew all the time, and while she'd originally felt shame that he'd brought his bastard home, to her it was now even worse, as the truth was, he'd instead brought someone else's, a raven from King's Landing. The maester said, and she shook her head and took it from him. "My brother?" she asked. "In the great hall with Lords Piper and Vance," the maester said. "The maester said, Pearl, fetch my brother," she called out, and the girl ran off as the maester left her alone. She broke the seal and looked at the words on the scroll, and once again they brought her no comfort. "To the realm, we are well aware of the false dragon and the tales he's begun to spin. The lies he speaks, though, come not from his own lips, but from the lips of men who seek to usurp the rightful king. Men we'd once thought honorable like Ned Stark, who's willing to lie about the rape, kidnap, and murder of his sister by Rhaegar Targaryen. Men who refused to accept the just sentence carried out to an adulteress and the children she tried to pass off as trueborn, so as to steal the throne like Jaime Lannister. Men who seek to put their own blood on the throne at any cost like Mace Tyrell. These lies are well known to us, and we call them out for what they are. Jon Snow is the bastard son of Ned Stark, begat on a whore by a lust-filled man while we were on our campaign to seek justice for his father and brother. The campaign to rescue the king's beloved, whose name they now sully with their lies. Good men and women of Westeros, do not fall prey to these lies. Let the faith be your guide. The king marches to end this lie, this untruth. Join him, and let truth win the day. Jon Arryn, Hand of the King. Edmure arrived not long after she read the letter, and he smiled when he read it, though she had not. I knew he could be no dragon. This will see his support fade away, Cat, Edmure said, and she looked at him, wondering if actually believed his own words. I doubt that. Even were the words in that scroll true, we'd still face the north, west, and reach. Edmure. Face them with most of our bannermen absent. She said, but the letter, they'll come. Surely now they know. He said, his voice almost panicked. Why, it changes nothing. Edmure, the odds remain the same, and we must do something to change them. How many men have we got? She asked. 6,000, and the garrison here. Edmure said. She began to do the sums. There were almost 12,000 men against them, though that wasn't including the Freys. Walder had perhaps 3, maybe 4,000 men at his call, and if they could bring those to bear, then perhaps they could at least match their own men. They could win back the Riverlands before the dragon bastards stole them from them completely. Though the price the old weasel would seek for his men would be a high one. You need to march, Edmure. The king will come, and if we're here when he does, then he'll not take kindly to it, she said. And Edmure looked to her nervously. Where? He asked. Against our enemies, she said. And Edmure looked cluelessly at her. Cat, those who've not answered the call, Edmure, we must bring them to our side. If they see an army at their gates, they'll come. And if you do this before the king arrives, then he'll see you as what you are, the right Lord Paramount for the Riverlands, she said. Aye, aye. I'll see it done. I'll speak to Mark, Hugo, and Lymond, he said. And Cat nodded as he ran from the room. The problem she had, though, was it wouldn't be enough. She knew, though, that they had to be seen to be doing something before Robert and Jon Arryn came, and more importantly than that, they had to be in a better position before the dragon came for them. She shuddered at the thought of it. The bastard would come. She knew he'd come, and the words he'd said in King's Landing played out in her head once more. Words in the wind, my lady. Words in the wind. That's what House Tully truly stands for, and just like words in the wind, your house too will soon be forgotten. She began to write out the message on the scroll, looking at it when she was done, and then walking hurriedly to the maester's rooms herself. Maester, to the twins, she said. And the maester nodded, Cat staying to see the raven sent. The next few days were hectic, and the night before they were ready to march she couldn't sleep, wondering if she was doing the right thing. Would it be best to wait for the raven's return, wait for the answer? Or should she wait until Jon Arryn came and use the hand to drive home their point? Would that make them look too weak? She thought it might, and if they wished to keep the Riverlands, they couldn't afford to be. Not that I'll let you keep the Riverlands, my lady. Your house will fall, as will your heads. She shook the bastard's voice from her head. They had to fight, fight or die, and she'd not leave this world until Jon Snow was dead, no matter what it took her having to do to see it done. The next morning, after breaking their fast, she walked to the gates to bid Edmure farewell. Her brother was either projecting confidence he didn't possess, or truly he thought her plan would see his bannermen just simply fall into line. I'll show them, Cat. We'll be ready for the bastard when he comes, Edmure said as they embraced. I know you will. Father would be so proud of you, Edmure. I'm so proud of you." She lied as she kissed his cheek and waved him on. The days seemed to merge into each other, Cat spending her nights unable to sleep as her dreams tormented her. Riverrun in flames, Edmure's head on a spike, and Cat being led to a block where the bastard waited for her. "You did this. You! Had you been able to love a motherless child, then this would not be how your story ends." Ned said loudly. "You are no mother of mine," Sansa said, turning away. "Why? Why, mother?" Robb said. "I hate you. I hate you." Arya's voice called out her daughter's anger clear. "I have a new mother now," Bran said as he stood beside Jarrell. "And so ends House Tully," the bastard said as the sword was raised in the air. She woke up screaming, her bed wet through from where she'd sweated through her nightclothes. Pearl and others rushed into her room and she shouted at them to leave her alone, curling into a ball and hiding in the corner of the room after they'd left. She stayed there until morning, awake, tired, and scared out of her mind. Dressing that day and trying to put a brave face on, she was heading to the hall to eat, or to at least try to, when one of the servants came to her. "My lady, there's a man to see you, a Lord Baelish," the servant said. She almost ran down the corridor to see if it was true, her heart racing and praying to the gods to let it be so. When she saw him, she almost cried right away, and forgetting propriety, appearances, or anything else, she hugged him and then wept against his shoulders. Petter, thank the seven you've come," she said through choking sobs. "I'm here, Cat. I'm here. All will be well," he whispered. And Cat felt herself finally relax. Winterfell, 297 AC. Barbary Dustin. She'd heard, like others, that the king had arrived, the boy formerly known as Jon Snow, and who everyone now knew the truth of. Barbary had never believed the tale Ned Stark had spun and found it shocking that others had. Brandon having a bastard was something she expected. Her wild wolf was free, and though she loved him dearly, she knew he could never be hers. The boy, though, was nothing like Brandon from what she'd heard, quiet, meek, almost a shadow, and so she had begun to question if she was mistaken, only for him then to prove himself anything but what she'd thought. She had reveled in any piece of news she got about Jon Snow. She'd seen him improve the North and prove himself with a blade. After hearing how he put the fish in his place and called them out for what they are, she'd feasted the night she'd been told about that. Barbary was sure, then she was right, he was Brandon's boy all right. Hearing the tale of the direwolf, of how he brought them all back to Winterfell, then of the fish being set aside, only making her more certain. Again, though it seemed she was wrong, even in her rightness. He wasn't Ned Stark's son, nor was he Brandon's. He was Lyanna's, and that made her feel somewhat conflicted. Lyanna was partly responsible for Brandon's death, though it was Rickard she blamed more for that. Jon Snow was now partly responsible for William's, though she blamed Ned for that truly. So where did that leave Jon Snow in her estimation? Something she wasn't sure of even when she rose and claimed him as her king. Demeric, she called to her nephew. "Eh?" He smiled as he sat beside her. "You met the king before?" "Aye, more than once. He's a good man, aunt. An interesting one," her nephew said softly. "How so?" she asked. Tom?" she said softly. "I told you of Miranda, aunt, how I feel about her," he said, and she smiled. Her nephew had fallen completely for the girl, but Roose had his sights set elsewhere. "Aye," she said. "We spoke in Highgarden, aunt, the king and I, and again in Casterly Rock. He told me something I found strange at the time, but it makes sense now." Demeric said. "What?" she asked curiously. "He said that while we may love our fathers and respect what they do for us or what they wish for us, they are not always the best judge of where our hearts lie. Their reasons for a match are not always our reasons for a match, and so why should we accept theirs and ignore our own?" Dom said, smiling. "Was that all?" "No. He said something else. He said delay for whatever reason you can find to delay, for as long as you can delay. The world is ever changing. and if I waited long enough, then I'd find that it may have changed for my benefit." Dom said, and she smiled. "And you've waited?" she asked. "Aye, though it's getting hard to keep father from speaking to Rickard," he said. "Wait a little longer, nephew. I'll speak to your father," she said, and chuckled when Dom kissed her cheek. They went to rise when the king walked in, but he waved his hand at them to sit, and she looked up as his two knights stood behind him. Her eyes focused on the Dornishman, and she wondered if it was his blade which had killed William. Her attention was taken from him, though almost immediately once the king began to speak. "My lords, my ladies, I have no doubt you have many questions, and I'll answer any you wish. Firstly, though, let me say this. I've come here because, though most of you know me, you knew me false. You knew me not as who I was truly, but as the mummer I was forced to be, the name I had no choice but to live under. I can understand that to some this will seem a betrayal, a falsity, and to those I can only apologize. My brother and sister were murdered, a babe not yet out of his cradle, and a 3-name-day-old girl. Gregor Clegane threw my brother so hard against the wall of his mother's room, it crushed his skull. He did so in front of his mother before he raped and killed her. My sister was stabbed 100 times, a 3-name-day-old girl, and that's what they did to her. And what was done to the man responsible, to the man who gave the orders? They were rewarded by a king who looked upon the bodies of a mother and her 2 children, who looked upon the bodies of my family and said that he saw no babes, only dragon spawn," the king said as he looked around the room. She watched as he leaned heavily on the table, his eyes glistening. As he turned to his uncle and placed a hand on his shoulder, "So, my lords, tell me, was the lie a betrayal, a falsity, or was it the work of an honorable man who wished to save his kin?" She heard the murmurs around the room, and finally Robert Glover rose, surprising her that he'd have the nerve to be the one. "I'll accept the lie, your grace. However, you carry the blood of Ares in your veins. How are we to know for sure that you won't, just like him, turn out to be another mad king?" Robert set to loud yells in a move from the Dornish knight, which the king stopped. "I also carry my father's blood." Lord Glover, was he mad? "I carry my mother's." Was she? I carry Eris blood in me. I also carry Rhaella's, Jaehaerys's, my great-grandfather, and Aegon the Unlikely's too. I carry the Conciliators and Alisand's, but I'm not just one side of my blood, am I? I carry Rickard Stark's, Cregan's and Torrens, Roderick's and Brandon's. I am both, and I'm none. For as much as we are our families, we are ourselves too, and I stand before you as you see me, a man not yet fully grown, but a man all the same," the king said, and she heard the voices of approval. "Your Grace, our allies?" Wyman asked, and she would have bet that he'd be the one to change the subject. "Aye, my lord. The West marches as we speak, under Lord Jaime Lannister's command. The Reach is marshaled too, and I believe they've marched. House Hightower has marched for sure, though I must travel there from here to be certain. Dorne has marched under Prince Oberyn Martell, and the lords of the Narrow Sea have taken Dragonstone." "Pushed," the king said to cheers. "Dorne, your grace," Roose said. "As I said, my lord, I am not just one part of my family. My sister, my brother, and their mother's kin have risen for me," the king said. And she heard men speak of numbers and how they had them now. "You can be sure of the Reach, your grace?" Roderick asked, and she looked to her father to see if she could judge his mind. "Lady Marjorie is my wife, my lord. We married in front of my gods at the Weirwood in Highgarden, and are to wed in front of hers when we have the chance. Lady Olenna has given me her word, and Randall Tarley has knelt and pledged to me the Reach will rise," the king said. She smiled at that, as did a lot of others in the room. That he was married already would stop the inevitable maneuver in trying to make a match with him. That he'd done it in front of the old gods only showed him for a true son of the North. My lords, I came here to answer your questions, and to show you something, I ask you to join me outside, the king said, walking from the room. She, like the others, wondered what it could be that he wished to show them, and so she moved quickly to the door, eager to be outside and to see whatever it was for herself. It took some time for them all to gather, and she, like the others, could see nothing in the king's hand. There was also nothing being brought to him as he walked out with the white wolf by his side. As I said when Lord Glover asked, I am not just one side of my family. Ghost here is a gift from the old gods, the living, breathing sigil of my mother's house. He's not the only gift I was given, my lords, my ladies, if you'll look above. She turned her head and looked to the sky and saw nothing for a few moments. Then the shape moved towards them. It was larger than a bird, much larger. By the gods, it couldn't be, she thought as it flew out of the clouds. It was white, and its wings the brightest blue she'd ever seen. The shadow it cast was huge as it flew over them. She turned and looked as it turned back, and the flames it shot from its mouth quickly covered the sky. Rhaenix, my lords, my dragon, the king said to loud cheers and some nervous faces. Highgarden 29-7 AC. Marjorie. She had arrived back to a much different Highgarden. Row upon row of tents surrounded the town, and she had never seen so many men armed in her life. That she was accompanied by her uncle leading her grandfather's own army, only adding to it. When her grandmother saw her and Sansa, Marjorie could see her relief on her face. That they were safe, well, and home, being her greatest concern, she confided in her later that night. Her father was in his element, and he threw yet another feast, his sixth, her grandmother quickly informed her. She was asked to sit front and center as befitting the future queen, and though she did as she was bid, she found the extra guards and attention to be annoying. Each day the lords would meet, and her grandmother would come back more and more frustrated, until finally, Marjorie could take it no more. "Grandmother, what is it? What's wrong?" she asked as they sat in the garden. "You're a fool of a father. He wishes orders to march, speaks of sieges and taking keeps, and yet has he moved? Has he marched?" Her grandmother said, her annoyance clear. "Do we have a plan, grandmother?" she asked, having no true knowledge of war. "Rowan and Tarly do, and yet your father is risking the favor we have gained by once again inserting himself where he doesn't belong." "But surely as lord he must," she asked. "Must he? He sat outside Storm's End while Rhaegar fell. You think I'll allow him to do the same to Jaehaerys?" her grandmother said, and Marjorie gasped. "Oh, my sweet child, forgive me, forgive the ranting of an old woman. Jay will not fall. He has something his father doesn't have. He has dragons, and we have the men, Marjorie." "We will be triumphant, and you will be queen," her grandmother said, and she nodded, worried though she was. She was glad to be in her room that night, taking the glass candle from the chest. She waited for it to light up and felt her relief when it did. "Jay? Jay, are you there?" she asked. "Aye, Jay, is it now?" he japed back. "Gods. I'm trying my best, John," she said, her annoyance clear. "Marge, what's wrong? I was jesting, you know that, right?" He said. And she sighed, annoyed at herself now. "I know, Jay. I was trying to get used to calling you that, so I didn't call you John in public," she said. "Oh, sorry. There's more though, Marge, isn't there?" he asked. "Aye. It's father. Grandmother thinks that he's going to make the same mistakes he made in the rebellion," he said. And she smiled, glad he figured it out, and she'd not had to say it aloud. "Aye," she said. And there was silence for a moment or two before Jay spoke again. "Have the lords lined up on the west balcony 2 days from now? Marge, all of them, your father included." "Why, you really think I was ready to go to war without seeing you?" he said. And she felt her heart beat a little faster. You're coming here? She asked, just to make sure. Aye, and 2 days from now, Marge, noon, he said. Noon, I love you, Jay said, and she smiled. I love you too. She told her grandmother when they broke their fast the next day and was relieved to see her relax. Later, when she told Sansa, her friend seemed a little subdued, though Willis explained it was the war itself that had Sansa that way. Her mother told her not to tell her father, otherwise he'd go out of his mind with planning the biggest feast yet, and so she kept him out of the loop for now. That day and night seemed never-ending, and even when she broke her fast the next morning, she felt as if time barely moved. Soon enough, though, she was heading to the balcony along with her grandmother and their guards. Sansa and Fang walked with Willis, while Garland escorted their mother, her father speaking to Lord Ashford and her Uncle Baylor as they moved in front of them. I have no idea why we're doing this. It's most odd, she heard her father say. Indeed. Well, no doubt we should find out soon enough, her uncle answered. As they stood on the balcony, it was Fang who noticed first, the wolf directing Sansa to the sight in the sky, her friend pointing it out to her, and she looked to the distance to see the shape coming towards them. Soon others began to notice, and she saw more and more point at the white shape, the voices rising as people's attention was drawn to the dragon as she flew towards them. Is that? It can't be. It's a dragon, she heard someone exclaim. She smiled when she looked out as the dragon flew closer. Up front, wearing armor she'd never seen the like of before, could only be Jay. Behind him, 2 men wore white cloaks, and as she looked closer, she wondered what the shape was in front of him. Ghost. He's brought Ghost, she heard Sansa say with a giggle. As the dragon flew closer, she and the others could see just how large she was now. She was as big as the balcony they stood on, and she was magnificent. Her eyes and the eyes of everyone looked up as she flew overhead, the dragon seeming to take an age to fly from their view. Come. It's time we met our king, her grandmother said, and she watched as lords began to move quickly, each one eager to grab the choicest slot to meet the king first. The king. But we're not ready, her father said as he hurriedly moved, and Marjorie tried her best not to laugh as she too hurried to meet with Jay. Winterfell, Highgarden, 297 AC, J. Harris Targaryen. After the Lords of the North saw Rhaenys, things began to move quickly. When he told them about Lyderon too, and that his uncle rode him, it created so many questions that he wished he'd kept it to himself. Still, it allowed for him to move straight to what he wished to do, which was to listen in on the North's plan for battle. Jay explaining some of what the others would be doing and then moving on to their plans quickly. Prince Oberyn will move into the Stormlands along with the Reach forces, while the West will march to the Riverlands to meet up with the River Lords and to cut Robert off from joining up with the Knights of the Vale. He began as he pointed to the map. You want us to meet you in the Riverlands? His uncle asked. No, I want you to march to here. He pointed to the crossroads. The Knights of the Vale just need to be delayed long enough for the Western Army under my uncle to join you, he said. With his dragon? Maegay asked. Aye, Robert. And Jon Arryn have the main forces. Stannis will lead the Stormlords and try and join up with them. If they can unite, then this is a different war. But we outnumber them separately as we do together. If we can keep them apart, then perhaps we can win this with far less bloodshed, he said. You really think there won't be blood shed here, Your Grace? Wyman said. I'd like to shed as little as I can, which is why the dragons aren't to be used in a full-on attack, he said to Nods. So no fields of fire, Rickard Karstark said almost dismissively. If it needs to be done, then it'll be done, my lord. If I think I'm putting too many lives at risk, or if we, by some twist of fate, find ourselves in trouble, then my uncle and I are both prepared to do what is necessary to save our allies' lives, even at the cost of many of our enemies. But when all is said and done, I intend to be king of all of Westeros, and not just those who rose for me, Burning fathers, sons, brothers. My family has done enough of that already. Forgive me for not wanting to make it my first choice. He said and saw some of the men look to him in agreement, though Roose Bolton seemed like he didn't agree. After the lords left, he stood in the room with his uncle, noticing the worried look on his face. "Uncle," he asked, concerned he'd said something to push him away from him. "What?" "Sorry, I was thinking. This is a good plan, Your Grace. An excellent one. I wish it didn't have to be done, but it must, and this is the best way forward," his uncle said. "Thank you, Uncle. I'll leave on the morrow." He said, "Talk to them, Your Grace, the lords. The Blackfish will seek reassurance over his kin, and others will wish to speak. Talk to them before you leave." "Uncle, Lady Catelyn, I know you made it clear. I'm with you, Your Grace, all the way," his uncle said as he reached out and touched his shoulder, and Jay felt glad of both the reassurance and the touch. He spoke to Wyman, the Great and Smallgens, and to Mage and Jorah, to Rickard Karstark, and even Roose Bolton. Though it was his son he spoke to for longer, Demeric listening carefully to what he said. As he walked to the sparring yard, he saw Bran and the Blackfish walking his way, and he looked to Loras and nodded, his friend laughing as they then moved a little quicker. "Jon, are you sparring?" Bran said before holding a hand to his mouth. "Sorry, Your Grace." "Aye, brother, I am," he said, seeing the excitement rise on his brother's face. He and Loras drew their swords, and he heard the gasp when Bran saw Dark Sister. Soon they were moving, and though he stretched it out, Loras yielded quickly enough. Seeing the crowd that had built up around them, Jay looked to Arthur and gave him a nod, the knight smirking as he pulled his sword. The gasps around the yard when seeing Dawn were only silenced when Arthur stood across from him, people pointing to the two swords and the whispers of their names being heard in the wind. "To 5 or a yield, sir," Jay said. "Aye, Your Grace," Arthur replied. Dark Sister was thin, and a long sword that from the moment he'd wielded it, Jay had felt it belonged in his hand. Dawn, to Arthur, he knew felt the same, though it was a great sword, which meant that Arthur had the greater reach. For Jay, it was quickness and movement, unconventional attacks and spins, and he readied himself to give his all, knowing he'd need to, just to keep up. The first clash of swords reverberated around the yard, and the sound was otherworldly. Jay moved and dodged, and the armor on his back now felt a part of him, just like the sword itself. Both were lighter than normal steel and so much stronger. It had taken him no time at all to get used to the slightly extra weight, and to his relief he found it no barrier to his movements. He thrust and Arthur parried, he spun and Arthur was there waiting for him, the dance going on for far longer than it had with Loras, before Arthur took the first and second points. As the knight moved away, though Jay moved towards him, the feint causing Arthur to ready to parry a blow which never came. Instead, Jay rolled and was behind him, taking a point while Arthur readjusted his feet. It was to be his only one. As though he had made the knight work, he lost the next two and soon yielded to the last. "Well, at least I got one today," he said to Laughs. "Aye, you're getting better, Your Grace," Arthur said with a smile on his face. "That was incredible, Jay, Your Grace," Bran said, and Jay was about to ask his brother to spar when he saw how the Blackfish was looking at him. "Bran, why don't you speak to Sir Arthur, Sir Brynden, a word?" he said. The knight nodded, Arthur looking at him while he shook his head and called Ghost to him, walking with the older knight to a quieter part of the yard. Loras stood behind him, and he hadn't left Arthur's view, but he knew he could go no further, or the knight himself would follow, and the look on his brother's face as he talked to Arthur made him smile a little. "You have questions, Sir Brynden? My house will be stripped of its Lord Paramount position, and your name will end," he said simply. "In your death," he said without looking at the man. "Why, sir?" he asked. "You asked the wrong man, Sir Brynden. Your sister was arrested and charged with adultery by Jon Arryn. She and her son are prisoners," he said. What? You lie, the Blackfish said, moving towards him, Jay raising his hand to stop Loras moving. For what reason would I? You know my feelings on your house, and I rise against John Aaron anyway. What care I what you think of the man? You'll not fight for me no matter what the reasons are. He said and saw the man almost nod. Cat is my sibling's mother. I'd not see her harmed, but she'll end her days far from my sight, he said. And Brendan nodded. Ned says you plan to make Bran Lord of Riverrun. Aye, but as a Stark, he said, walking away. After speaking briefly to Bran, he and his Kingsguard walked to the Godswood, and Jay knelt before the tree, praying to the old gods that those he cared for didn't come to harm. Hearing Arthur turn, he stood up to see a gray-haired, tall, thin woman walk towards him. It took him a moment to see the sigil and recognize the long axes and the crown that was stitched to her side. Lady Dustin, he said as he rose. Your Grace, she said, looking back at him. Aye, you have her look to be sure. Some of her temperament, too, in another life. I could have been your good aunt, but alas, it was not to be. This is the only life we could have met, my lady, he said, and she looked at him before nodding. Was it you, Sir Arthur? Was it you who struck my William down? She asked, and Arthur nodded. I protected my king, my lady. Your husband fought well, as did the others, though I can say with all truth that I cannot differentiate one from the other. I lost my brothers that day, and I care not to think about it, Arthur said sadly. Is he worth it, Sir Arthur? The lives that were lost, do you think him truly worth theirs? There are many lives I'd give mine own for my lady, none worth so much as the king I now serve, Arthur said, and Jay felt himself gulp as he looked at them. My nephew says you promised him his happiness. Your Grace, you may consider that payment for my husband's life. For now my men are yours. On payment of that debt you have my fealty too, and the past will then remain where it belongs. Barbary said, walking away. He spoke to Marjorie that night and flew the next morning, saying his goodbyes to his uncle as he did so. Soon they were over the west, and he landed near the crag. After eating and resting, they then took to the air once more. Below him, armies rode and marched, and he wondered if the war had yet begun. Jay felt his heart beat a little faster when he entered the Reach, and soon they were flying over Red Lake and Golden Grove, before finally seeing Highgarden itself. Rhaenys flew over the keep, and he looked down to see the men lined up, although his eyes as always were on her, and he wished she could see his smile behind his helm. They landed not too far away, and after speaking to Rhaenys and telling her to find food and a place to stay, he walked toward the castle with a spring in his step. One that did not go unnoticed by Arthur and Loras. Eager to get there, Your Grace, Loras said. Aye, Loras, I am. Try and keep up, he said, laughing when Ghost raced on ahead of him. It seems none of us will beat him, Your Grace, Arthur said. Jay just smiled. Ghost would see Marjorie and feel her touch before he would, though he could not begrudge the wolf that. He only wished he could stay here longer than he was intending, but he knew he could not. The war waited for none of them, and unlike Mace, he'd not dawdle. There were many more miles to travel, and soon enough it'd be west he aimed for, and a stag that would be in his sights. Stonehenge 29-7 AC, Jonos. He called his banners after the ravens came. Once the message came from Shella, he knew he had no choice but to pledge his support to the true king. That he'd not rise for Edmure Tully had been a given, but he had been prepared to leave it at that, until the raven came claiming Jon Snow to not be who he thought he was, but the son of Rhaegar Targaryen forced him to reconsider. The truth after that was easy to discern. Ned Stark had lied to protect his kin, and now the boy was going for the throne. Working out that he'd win wasn't too hard either, and yet he still hesitated. His location demanded it. Should Robert arrive first, and he was flying dragon banners, then his house would suffer. Then the raven came for Shella. She was raising her banners for the dragon, as was Mallister, Mooten, Darry, and Blackwood, the last giving him almost a reason to pause once more, though in the end he knew what he must do, and so the dragon banner now flew over his keep. My lord, Forces arrive from the west. Harry said. Friendly? He asked his bastard son. I doubt it, my lord, the silver trout, Harry said, and he readied himself, glad at least it was Edmure and not Robert who had come. He climbed his tower, and with a mirish eye he looked out, watching as the army arrived. It shocked him that Edmure had managed to gather so many and had made his own force look pitiful in comparison. Though he was glad there were no siege engines amongst Edmure's supplies. With time, they could be built. But time helped him. Walking from the tower, he asked for the horses to be readied and a flag of parley to be presented. It took some time for the answer to come back from Edmure, and when it did, Janos ready to ride out. He had to force Harry to stay alongside Endry, telling them he needed his kin here just in case. He didn't expect them to break parley, but he put nothing past Tully. His actions towards the king proved his mind wasn't clear where Jaehaerys was concerned. Riding out to meet them, he looked to see House Piper, Vance, Goodbrook, and Ryger, and not many more had joined with Edmure, leaving him far worse off than he should have been. Lord Bracken, I sent the Raven and called you to arms, and yet you did not answer, Edmure said when he met him in his hastily arranged tent. I did not, for you serve a false king, my lord, and I pledged my sword to the true one. A bastard. You pledged yourself to a bastard. Edmure laughed as around him the lord smiled. Did I? Better than a monster, my lord, he said. And the smile stopped. Your liege lord called and you refused. That makes you a traitor, Janos, Mark Piper said. Or my king called and you refused, making you one mark. Only the victorious get to write this story. Are you sure the side you serve will be the ones to win? He said, smiling. King Robert put down the dragons once before. Lyman said, when he brought more of the Riverlands and had Ned Stark on his side. Lyman, here, the odds are not in his favor, he said. And Edmure looked at him angrily, a side led by a bastard, a green boy. Edmure said, and Janos couldn't help but chuckle. That very same green boy has knocked you on your arse more than once, but by all means, try your luck once more. My lord, the West, the Reach, the North, I'm sure will look forward to proving the green boy true. So you will not rise? Edmure asked. I've risen, my lord, just not for you, he said with a smirk. Then we'll see you on the morrow. Edmure said, and Janos sighed as he turned to walk from the tent, stopping to look back at the other lords, men he'd called friend before this day. He fights because he's been fool enough to poke the dragon. He has no choice, he said, pointing to Edmure. The rest of you should know better. He heard the grumbling as he readied his horse, and then he quickly rode back. The villagers had taken refuge in the keep, and his men had built barricades to try and stop the advance. Though he knew it was no use, and he only hoped that Edmure wouldn't be cruel enough to burn the village to the ground. Every able man had a weapon in his hand, and he readied for the attack on the morrow. It came earlier than he thought, and the fighting through the village was fierce. Soon, though he looked on as the forces began to surround his keep. Janos looked to his men, his kin, and readied himself for the attack on Stonehenge itself. When the horns came, he was stunned, though not as much as the men who were setting up their tents waiting for the siege to begin. He saw men fall and horses race off, saw men run, and as he looked through the mirish eye, he could barely believe it. Those are Blackwood men, he said. And for the first time ever he found himself happy to say those words. Aye, but on whose side? Hendry, his nephew asked. He didn't need to answer, though, as their actions were doing that, and though they didn't aim to rout the forces below them, didn't chase after them, or didn't seek to kill them all, the day was theirs all the same. All the same, the attack had been completely unexpected, and Edmure had been caught with his pants down, literally according to songs that were sung later that night. Jonas watched as the army that had come to take his home from him was chased off his lands. Tents, horses, armor. Some were carried off with them, and yet most had been left behind, and in that, their victory was complete. Morale-wise, even more so, as his men cheered, and he could only imagine the dejection those on Edmure's side must have felt. As he made his way to the gate, he prepared to let Tytos Blackwood into his home for the first time ever. He'd even feast the man tonight, if he'd break bread with him. "Jonos," Tytos said. "Tytos," he replied. "I'd not expected you, I must say. We have our differences, but they're for another day. My king sent me here, Jonos, and so here I've come," Tytos said. "You spoke to him?" he asked, wondering where the king was. "No, I received a message from a dead man telling me Tully marched here," Tytos said with a laugh. "A dead man? Sir Richard Lonmouth lives and is at the king's side, Jonos. It seems more of Rhaegar's old guard survived too, as Sir Arthur Dane guards the king's back. The sword of the morning," he said almost in a whisper. Help is on the way, Jonos. The king's men march, and we're to meet them at Riverrun." "Ha, good. Tully tried to take my home from me. I'll be glad to help the king take his," he said, laughing loudly. He left a force to garrison the keep, and he rode with Tytos and his men, told along the way that the Mallisters, along with others, would soon be joining them, and they'd meet with the lions soon enough. Looking back at Stonehenge in the distance, and then at the man he rode beside, he shook his head and began to laugh. "What's so funny, Jonos?" Tytos asked. "All my life I worried it'd be you who took Stonehenge from me. Tytos, little did I know that I'd see a king in my time who'd prove me wrong," he said, and Tytos laughed a little. Now let's go gut some fishes." Seeing the dragon as it flew towards them, Olenna couldn't help but smile and be glad that this was the side she'd chosen. Listening to the reactions of those around her as they hurried outside, only making the reality of the situation even more clear. Yet it was the man riding the dragon that Olenna was truly happiest to see. Jay was needed here, and she hoped that he'd deal with Mace in a way which saved face for them and for her foolish son. She stood in line with the others as they waited eagerly, and it was when she saw him properly that she heard the intake of breath behind her. Olenna could see the reason why, too. The armor he wore was his father's, or as close to it as he could have gotten. Soon, though, her attention was drawn away from the king and to the two men who followed, and Olenna felt more proud than she'd felt since she'd found out about Jay and Marjorie. "Is that Loras?" Aleri said. "It is. He's a Kingsguard," Willis said from her side, her grandson smiling at his brother. Olenna couldn't remove the smile from her own face. Her grandson looked incredible in his shined armor, his white cloak billowing behind him as he and Sir Arthur walked after the king. She knew it had been his dream ever since he was a boy, to be a knight, to serve in the noble order alongside other true knights. That he would do so for a good king and queen had been only a distant hope to her. As she looked to Marjorie, who was smiling, and to Jay, who, despite looking to others, couldn't keep from looking to her granddaughter, she knew she had gotten all she'd ever hoped for, and more. "Your Grace, Highgarden is yours," her son said as they all took a knee. "Arise, Lord Tyrell, my lords and ladies," Jay said, and his voice was firm and strong, Olenna smiling when he kissed Alari's offered hand and moved to do the same to hers. "Lady Olenna," he said, kissing her hand. "Your Grace, it's good to see you." She looked back at him as Jay moved to Sansa, and then Marjorie. "My lady, a pleasure, truly," he said. And Olenna didn't have to look to see that Marjorie's smile was shared by Mace and her mother. "Your Grace, if I may escort you inside," Marjorie said, and Jay nodded as he took her arm, and they walked into the keep. She immediately went to Mace and asked him to gather the lords, as the king would no doubt wish to address them. Her son rushed to do as she bid. Olenna herself hurried after Jay and Marjorie and almost expected her grandson and Sir Arthur to deny her entry to the room, where they now stood in guard at the door. The two of them did not, though, and she walked in to find her Marjorie and Jay kissing each other passionately. Ahem. She coughed, and she chuckled at the look Jay gave her when he turned her way. As king, can I not just order you to leave? He said with a smirk that got a giggle from her granddaughter. You could, your grace, of course, though I'd take my granddaughter with me, she said, raising her eyebrow at him. Well, in that case, you're most welcome to stay, my lady, he said as he sat down, Marjorie taking a seat beside him. She looked to the white wolf who sat not at the king's side but at Marjorie's, and a knock on the door soon brought Willis and Garland inside, both her grandsons taking a seat when Jay nodded to them. You named Loras to your king's guard, your grace? She said with a smile. Aye, my lady, it's what he wished for, and I can think of no one I'd rather guard my back, or my queen's, Jay said, reaching over to take Marjorie's hand in his. Where is the dragon, your grace? Willis asked as there was another knock on the door, Sansa almost running in to hug her brother. I'm sorry, little sister. I would have come to you when I was done here, Jay said, and Sansa shook her head. No, it's no problem. I just wished to see you, brother, Sansa said as Jay pointed to a space beside him for Sansa to sit at. Once she had sat down, he looked around the room, and Olenna was surprised to see how serious his face got. I take it Lord Mace was waiting my orders to march? He said, his voice firmer than it had been just a moment ago. He was, Garland said, and Jay looked at him contemplatively before he spoke again. I intend to name your father commander of my reserve army and order him to see the Reach is secured, Sir Garland. I hate to ask this of you truly, but I need you to stay with him, he said, and Garland looked at Jay. Your grace? Garland said, disappointed that he'd not be marching to war, though Olenna felt glad of it. In time, Sir Garland, I'll call for you to march west. For now, I need most of the Reach forces, Tarly, Rowan, Hightower, to march, to join up with Prince Oberyn, and to break the Storm Lords, Jay said. Could my brother not be better used there, Jay? Marjorie asked, and Jay turned to look at her. Most certainly, but I need someone to carry my orders out here. When I call, I need someone to go against your father, should he? Dally, Olenna said, and Jay nodded. Sir Garland, I need you to pick the best men remaining. Take your pick of the houses that will follow your lead. I'll leave you a written order with a copy of it here with your grandmother that will countermand any orders your father gives. I need it to be you. Do you understand why? Jay asked, and Garland shook his head, and as Jay went to explain, Willis interrupted. So father doesn't lose face, Willis said. Aye, if it's another lord, then the question will be asked. Word would spread that I don't trust my good father. If it's his son that does it, it'll look as if he ordered it, Jay said. And she found herself nodding along. You think I'll be needed? Garland asked, and Olenna shuddered at how eager he was for war. I think you'll march, sir. How needed you'll be, or any one of us will, depends on whether or not Robert is lucky, Jay said, after speaking on some other matters and finding out that Ghost would be staying by Marjorie's side, something that both her granddaughter and Sansa argued about. He should be with you, Jay. You'll be the one who's fighting, Marjorie said. She's right, John. He needs to be by your side, Sansa said, and Olenna could tell how annoyed she was by the use of his name, something she'd not done since entered the room. I cannot leave a Kingsguard here. Loras would never forgive me, and Arthur won't be left behind. Where I go, he goes. I'm also going to be on Rhaenix most of the time, and when I'm not, I have Jorah, Walder, Barristan the Bold. I'm well protected. Marge, if Ghost is here, then I'm here. I can be sure you're safe, Jay said, holding her hand to his cheek. What of you? What of you? She asked. With Ghost, you'll know that I am also, he said, and she was happy to see Marjorie nod. They had only spoken a few moments, and there were still lords taking their seats when they reached the room. Jay flanked by her grandson and Sir Arthur, whose own appearance was commented on happily. Taking her seat at the high table, she looked out at the lords when Jay rose to his feet. My lords of the Reach, it gladdens me to see so many men here who serve my father so truly. Jay began, and she looked at Randall Tarly and Mathis Rowan, who were glaring at her son. We stand now so very close to what my father wished for, a realm that we can all be proud of, one where we all prosper and the promise my father held can finally be fulfilled. Olenna saw some of the lords nodding along. Tarly and Rowan had switched their attention to the king, which was good, as it kept Mace from their eyeline. The northern army marches, my lords, Dawn marches, the west marches, as do the lords of the narrow sea. Dragonstone belongs to the dragons again. My lords, my family's keep bears our flag once more. It's time for the lords of the Reach to join the fray. Are you with me? I asked, are you with me, my lords? Will you march for me, for justice, for honor, for glory? Jay said loudly, for justice, for honor, for glory. The sounds rang around the room, and Jay waited a few moments for them to calm down before he looked out at them once more. My lords, I intend to convene a war council immediately. Lord Tarly, Lord Rowan, Lord Redwine, Lord Ashford, and Sir Baelor. If you would follow Lord Willis, I'll be there presently. Sir Garland, if you'd speak to the remaining lords while I speak to my future good father, Jay said, and she saw Mace puff up. Mace came to her after speaking to Jay, and she wondered exactly what it was that he'd said to her son. Whatever it was, it had clearly worked as Mace pranced about, as if he'd been given the most important job in Westeros, when in truth he'd been asked to sit out the war itself. Garland came back to say he'd gotten the Fossaways, Crane, Caswells on board, and they'd make up the reserve for Jay. When Willis came to speak to her a little later, he said that Jay had spoken privately to Rowan and Tarly and then to the others, and they would march south on the morrow. Since he'd not had time to organize a true feast, they instead had a typically large dinner. She very quickly noticed how Jay sat close to Marjorie, and that they both spoke almost exclusively to each other. Jay only not speaking to her granddaughter when he spoke to Sansa and Willis. After the dinner was over, she made her way to the rooms they'd put aside for the king, seeing both Arthur and Loras on guard outside. Is he inside? She asked Loras, who nodded, and she had to admire her grandson. He'd been on duty for most of the day and had never faltered nor taken his attention from that duty. My lady? Jay said as she walked in and took a seat, surprised that Marjorie wasn't in her with him. My granddaughter, your grace? She asked. Was tired, my lady, and refusing to go to sleep unless I did, so I hope you'll forgive me for the small untruth I told her, he said. As she looked around the room and saw the papers he'd been working on. The wedding, Jay? She asked as he bid her sit. I wish it could take place now. But not only do I wish my family and those I care about to be there, as does Marjorie. We've also decided it's to be held in the Sept of Baelor, my lady, so the people of King's Landing can share our joy, see it for the new beginning that we intend it to be, he said. And she smiled at that. A part of me almost wished to force you to marry now, to do so before you headed off to war, she said. And he smiled. I wish my aunt to be there, my uncles. I see now the wedding we had was wrong. Love shouldn't be secret, it shouldn't be hidden, and the realm should know what we feel for each other. Jay said, and she nodded. Very well, Tarly, Rowan? Have an issue with Lord Mace, one which is resolved, my lady, he said. When do you leave? She asked a moment later, her voice more concerned. I'll stay one more day. I wish to spend time with Sansa, with Marjorie, and to make sure arrangements are made here. Then I'll leave you to your work, she said, and he nodded as she rose. I'll send Loras to speak to you on the morrow, my lady, you and his family, he said. And she thanked him as she left. 2 days later, she watched as the dragon took to the sky. Beside her, Sansa had her hand held by Willis, and though she looked worried, she bore it well. Marjorie gripped her own hand tightly, and when she looked to her, Olenna could see her granddaughter was on the verge of tears, though it was the white wolf who moved before she could. Ghost rubbing against Marjorie's side and her granddaughter stroking the wolf's back, her expression soon changing and a small smile appearing on her face. Duskendale 297 AC. John Connington. As the ships docked, John was eager to set foot on Westeros soil for the first time in 4 and 10 years. He looked at the port city, and tried not to dwell on the fact that had events turned out differently here, he'd never have had to leave. If Barristan had failed, then Rhaegar would have been crowned and Aerys confined to history where he belonged. Alas, it was not to be. And the bold added to his legend, a little less. Then 6 years later, the Targaryens had fallen, and Rhaegar was dead, and Jon sighed as he thought of it. He looked at Duck and nodded, sending him to wake Aegon, and then he walked to the front of the ship. Behind him, over 200 ships ready to dock, the entire might of the Golden Company, elephants and all, and he wondered what their plans were from here. Homeless. Harry had refused to tell him too much, and despite Aegon's annoyance at the man, it was neither of them who was truly in charge, something that had been made clear to him when he'd met the Captain General of the company. "I never expected to see you again, Jon," Harry said as they stood in the tent. "I always expected to see you, Harry. You're a survivor," he said, and the portly man chuckled. Jon, pleased to see the man's hair slip to reveal the bald spot. "'Tis a pity that Miles wasn't, is what you truly mean," Harry said, and Jon didn't reply. "Not that it matters. We leave soon, Duskendale, and we'll meet Illyrio's man there for further orders." "Aegon will give the orders," he said, and Harry chuckled. "He may be your King Jon, but until the fat man's gold clears, he's not mine yet," Harry said. Getting Aegon to understand and agree, though, had been even more difficult, and only Jon telling him that once Illyrio had spoken, they'd then be the ones in charge, calmed him down. So to anyone who looked, they were simply among the other captains of the company, or simple soldiers, and not the king in hand that they truly were. Jon didn't much care for the subterfuge, but they were about to travel into dangerous territory, and the safety of his king was paramount. "Griff." He heard a voice call, and he looked to see one of Illyrio's men waiting for him on the dock. "Raloris," he said, trying to remember the name of the man as he walked onto the ship towards him. "A letter from the Magister, Griff. Most important," the young man said, handing him the letter. Without waiting, he ripped it open and shook his head. This couldn't be true. The war had begun, and for now they had to fight at Robert Baratheon's side. Surely not. But as he read it, the revelations only got even more strange, and Griff found himself needing to sit down to try and make sense of it. "Griff, I travel with the king to meet up with you. For now, he must see us as allies, must be in no doubt that we are on his side. Speak to young Griff and explain to him why that needs to be. We face much larger odds. So we fight by his side, and when the time is right, we make our move. The Lannisters, Starks, and the Reach have combined to put Ned Stark's bastard on the throne. They claim him as Rhaegar's son of all things, and they've stolen our allies from us for now. So we're forced to make new ones, the Stag and the Falcon along with the Fishes, and I've been forced to take other actions of which I'll speak to you when we meet. For now, your company member Griff, young Griff also. For now, we play this mummery out. I hope when we speak you'll see why it won't be for long. Illyrio." He shook his head at the changed events. It was to be a disunited realm they came back to, a realm in chaos, with the Lannisters on one side and the Vale, North, and Stormlands on the other. They'd then bring the Reach and Dorne to bear and destroy the victors of that false war. Now it seems they were to take part in a true one where the odds were not in their favor. Was that not enough? Then there was the matter of Ned Stark's bastard. That the Kingslayer would sully his honor wasn't a surprise. That the Grasping Roses would seek a crown by any means wasn't either. But Ned Stark gave him pause. He cared not for the man, but his honor was not something he questioned. To claim a son of Rhaegar, though, to sully his king, his prince, that was something he couldn't understand nor forgive. "Perhaps it's the truth," a voice said, and he shook his head. He could see how the story would be explained. A son of Rhaegar and Lyanna Stark, it could fit enough to make it work. But it couldn't be true. It wasn't true. Even if it was, the boy was bastard or a second son, either way, Aegon was the one true king, wasn't he? Jon was lost in his thoughts when Aegon arrived, and it took him a moment to realize he was there. the mask on the side of his face that was furthest from him, allowing him to see his unblemished side, to see his silver prince, his king. No. This letter had to be a lie. From Illyrio, Aegon, it seems we must remain mummers for a little longer. Wow, he said, handing him the letter. He watched as Aegon read the letter, the boy's face growing angrier and angrier. Jon, standing looking at him and waiting for the storm that was inevitably to come. Since he'd been attacked by the dragon, Aegon's temper had grown short, his angry outbursts becoming more and more common. Nothing that he, Duck, Halden, or even Septa Lemore had been able to do seemed to be able to change that. Though once he expressed himself fully, Aegon usually calmed down. Lies, damn lies, wolves, lions, roses, all of them trying to steal my throne. Trying to put a bastard on my throne, and now I'm forced to march with the stag and the falcon. Usurpers, thieves, all of them. Aegon shouted, Griff. He eyed as people began to gather at the dock. I'll see them all in the ground, all of them. This bastard too. Aegon shouted and stormed from the deck, Septa Lemore following with Haldon behind her. Could we not have kept that from him, Jon? Duck asked, and Jon shook his head. No, Duck. He needs to know. We're soon to be among our enemies. He needs to be aware of everything. The wrong word or misplaced step and we could all lose our heads, his included, he said. And Duck looked at him before walking away. They sat in Lord Riker's hall that night. The man seemed to be unhappy to have them there. And for the briefest moment, Jon wished to tell him who he truly had in his hall, let him know that he hosted Rhaegar's son. House Riker had always been loyal to the dragons, and he could see how hard it was for the man to have to make ready to host the stag. Renfred had looked at him and shook his head, his disgust clear at the thought that Jon was now fighting on Robert's side. Were it not out of worry for Aegon's safety, then he'd have made it clear he was not. But he could take no chances, and so he played his mummer's role. The Lord did come to him later in the night. His expression somewhat changed, and Jon welcomed him when he sat beside him. It's been a long time, Jon, though I'd never have imagined you to be here in this regard. Renfred said, I'm a member of the company now, Renfred. Like them, my word is as good as gold. But, he said, I'd have thought you'd be fighting on the dragon's side, fighting for Rhaegar's son, Renfred said, staring at him closely. Why would I fight for Ned Stark's bastard, Renfred? Why would I be a part of that mummer's show? He asked. Renfred moved closer to him, his eyes looking around the room, and Jon was glad they were alone at the table. That boy is Rhaegar's son, Jon. I know it to be true. I saw him knock a fish on his arse in King's Landing. 10 name days old, and he put Edmure Tully on the ground in an honor duel, Renfred said. An honor duel? Against Edmure Tully, Hoster's heir. Jon smiled at the thought of that, seeing a young boy knock the fish lord on his arse, and imagining what the grasping Hoster thought of that. The night previously, he called the man out for the actions of his house, for being the oath-breakers they were. The duel he fought because the man insulted his mother and father. He made him apologize in front of the king, even went without an apology to himself as long as his father and mother received one. Renfred said, That doesn't make him a dragon, he said, and Renfred nodded. Aye, but a dragon he is, and you, my friend, are on the wrong side, Renfred said, standing up and moving away. And you, Renfred? He asked. I'll see my house survive Jon and pray this dragon is more understanding than the last one. The Lord said as he walked away. His sleep that night was troubled as he remembered Harrenhal and the day the smiles died. Rhaegar looking as majestic as ever, his armor black and glistening as he rode past Elia and crowned a woman who was not his wife. Jon could see the look in his prince's eyes, a look he knew all too well as it had always been in his own when he looked at Rhaegar. Protect him, Jon. Protect our son, he heard them say, both of them no longer looking at each other but staring at him instead. Protect him, Jon. Beware of the Black Dragon. They arrived the next morning. The stag had gotten fat, and were he not traveling with Illyrio, then he'd have been the fattest man of the group. Jon looked at the force they brought, and it was no more than 3,000 or 4,000. He looked to Aegon, who gripped his sword tight, and Jon moved back to reassure his king. When Robert looked to the Golden Company, he could see his pleased face, more so when he saw the elephants and when Strickland feted him as his king. Beside him, Aegon bristled, and he did so for the rest of the day until they were finally brought to meet with Illyrio, his unsullied guards making sure they were not disturbed. Aegon looked to him to speak, and Jon waited until the fat man finished what he was eating. It was bad enough to speak to Illyrio at the best of times. To watch him eat when you did so would turn your stomach and rob you of your appetite. "Forgive me, Jon. Aegon, we've ridden hard," Illyrio said as all but stuffed his face with the small bird. "Magister, what is our plan?" he asked. "For now we play with the stag, Jon. Our enemies are too large to defeat alone, and we need to even the odds or we'll never see the rightful king on his throne." Illyrio said, looking to Aegon. "You would have me march with the man who killed my father?" Aegon said angrily. "I would see you crowned Aegon. I promised you justice and a crown, and I'll see you have both," Illyrio said. "We're outmatched, badly," he said, and Illyrio nodded. "I know. I've taken steps to correct that. Once the answer comes, then we can put the stag in the ground and see a true king crowned," Illyrio said. "Steps?" he asked. "The pretender will fall. I'll not see Aegon's crown go to a false dragon. His allies will eventually come to us, but they'll receive no reward. It'll no longer be a rose who's crowned, but a snake," Illyrio said. "I'm to be crowned," Aegon said, misinterpreting what Illyrio said. "Of course, my king, but you need a queen and we need allies. I've sent a message to your uncles, told them the truth about you, and offered to make your cousin a queen. Soon we'll have Dornish spears to join the Golden Company, and then my king, then the realm will learn who you truly are," Illyrio said. "My uncles. I'll see my uncles soon," Aegon said with a smile, and Illyrio nodded, though Jon felt uncomfortable for some reason. Was it Dornish spears and another Dornish queen, he wondered? Or was it his dream and Illyrio's words that were playing on his mind? "Protect him, Jon. Protect our son," the voice said in his head once more. Highgarden. Dragonstone, 297 AC. Jaehaerys Targaryen. He could feel her excitement as they flew over the countryside, each flap of her wings bringing them closer to Dragonstone. At first, he'd wished to fly a different route, to go over the Stormlands or to see where the Dornish army was, but Rhaenys was far too keen to get to the island for that. Instead, she went the shortest route possible, and it took all he had to get her to land by the Blueburn near the grassy vale to rest. Rhaenys wishing to fly through the night despite her being tired. "We need to rest, Rey. Us, if not you," she said softly. "Very well, but we fly early on the morrow, Jay. I wish to be there before nightfall," she said, and he chuckled as he leaned against her head. "We'll leave early, Rey. Now please rest for me," he said, and she huffed as she lay down. As Arthur made up the fire, he and Loras walked to the river and filled their pouches with the cool water, Jay taking a quick drink and throwing some on his face before they readied to turn back. "What did they say?" he asked as they walked back to Arthur. "They asked me if it was what I truly wished for, if I was happy. When I told them I was, they told me how happy they were for me, how proud," Loras said, and Jay patted him on the back. "They should be," he said, and Loras smiled as they reached the fire and sat down. They talked for a few moments as they ate, Jay asking Arthur about Dragonstone and how often his father visited. "He was its prince, my king. We had our own court there, and it was different. Aerys, though, grew paranoid that we were plotting against him, and so he'd order us back to King's Landing whenever the whim took him," Arthur said. Ray said they were happy there, father. Her and Egg, Elia too, he asked. They were. Your mother would have loved it. Also my king. It's different. Freeing. Arthur said, Thank you. I'll turn in for the night. Don't stay up late, either of you. Rainix will ensure we're protected, so both of you get some rest, he said, though he knew it was pointless, as he lay down to sleep himself. Though he found he too was unable to rest, excitement to see his family's home, not all that was on his mind as he thought back to Highgarden and to his wife. Highgarden, a few days earlier, all he wished to do was spend time with her. Time with Sansa too, but mainly time with his wife, to hold her, to kiss her, to just be with her. But just like in Winterfell, he had work to do, and so after spending a little time with her and laying out some of his plans, he addressed the lords and ready for the next step of them. Bringing them on board had already been done, and all he needed to do was rile them up a little. Once that was done, he asked to speak to Mace alone, knowing the man would need to feel special, valued. He was led to a surprisingly small room, and he sat down facing his good father Mace, staring nervously at him. Jay had gone over and over in his head on the flight here what needed to be done. Mace couldn't be left in charge of military matters, but couldn't be seen to be removed, which left him in a quandary. Then he'd hit upon it, and it was simple until it was not, though the solution to the second problem was much easier to find. Lord Tyrell, forgive me for not informing you of my plans, but I wish to speak to you in person, so there would be no doubt of your important place in them, he said, and saw Mace sit up a little straighter. Of course, your grace. Soon we're to be kin, my lord. Marjorie and I have agreed to marry in the Sept of Baelor, to have the realm come and see us wed and crowned. I know she looks forward to having her father walk with her to face the High Septon, he said, and saw the smile on Mace's face. A royal wedding for the realm to remember, your grace. Mace said, Precisely, my lord, one worthy of my new queen, he said to an even bigger smile. My lord, to ensure this happens, I find myself in need of your services. You're the only man I can call upon to see this done. Demand of me anything, your grace, Mace said, and Jay thought the man was fit to burst. I need to make sure the Reach doesn't fall, my lord, as much as my attack is important. My future queen's safety, the safety of her homeland, is of paramount importance to me too. So while I'll ask some men from the Reach to march and harry the Stormlords, I need to place a man who is resolute and unyielding to see this important mission is carried out. Can I count on you, my lord? He asked. Of course, your grace, unquestionably, Mace said. Then I'll have Sir Garland make up a force of the men who'll stay with you to form this and my reserve, while I'll ask some of the more troublesome of lords to move against the Stormlords, men more capable for such a lesser mission, he said with a smile. I thank you, your grace, for this very important mission, Mace said, rising when he did. Think nothing of it, my lord. We're to be family after all, he said. He looked to Arthur and nodded when he left the room, and together with Loras they walked to where Willis was standing with the other lords, Tarly and Rowan looking to him eagerly, though they also kept looking to Arthur too. Lord Willis, could you ensure your guards keep us from being disturbed? I'd like Sir Arthur and Sir Loras to attend this meeting also, he said, and Willis nodded before doing what he asked. Your grace, it's so good to finally meet you, Mathis said, and Jay nodded to him and the other lords. You too, my lord, all of you, and I only wish we had more time to speak, but we mustn't dally, my lords. There are things that need to be done, and I've called you here to discuss them, he said, seeing Randall Tarly nod appreciatively. He asked for a map, and when it was laid out, he pointed to the Stormlands. My lords, the West rides to meet up with our allies in the Riverlands, and to see those who've allied with House Tully brought to heel. The North will march to cut off the Vale, and Lord Jaime will lead his forces against Roberts, where I will join him. I need the Reach and Dorne to take the Stormlands, to stop the army joining up with any of the others, and to force Robert to turn his attention there. Lord Tarly, I'm placing you in command of this campaign. You're to meet up with the Dornish forces under Prince Oberyn, and between you bring the Stormlands under our control, he said, and saw the other lords and Sir Baelor look pleased by what he said. I thank you for this honor, your grace, Lord Tarly said. For Ashford, my lord, let Robert remember who it was who dealt him his defeat, he said. And Tarly nodded. Lord Tyrell, your grace? Sir Baelor asked. We'll see the Reach is protected, and along with Sir Garland be in charge of our reserves. I'll leave it to you, my lords, as to what forces you deem necessary out of your own to take with you. But as I said, Lord Tarly, you're in command of this part of our army. I've no doubt, should you deem it needed, you'll adapt my plans, he said, and looked the lord direct in the eye. Of course, your grace, should it be needed, Lord Tarly said with a smirk. Just in case, my lord, a copy of my orders, he said, handing him a letter. It supersedes any other orders and comes directly from the king, my lord, should it be needed, he said with a smile. Your grace, Lord Tarly said with a nod. I wish you good fortune, my lords, and when next we meet, I hope this war is done. If not, then it'll be an honor to ride into battle with you, he said as he turned and moved to walk away before stopping and walking back to the table. He stood silently for a moment, looking at each of the lords in the eye. My father made some mistakes, my lords. He tried to take the throne without fighting a war, and then got sucked into one he wasn't ready for. I'm ready, my lords, truly. For this war I've been ready all my life. I've woken dragons from stone and united 4.5 kingdoms behind me. I am the future of my house, the only evidence of my mother and father's love. To you, my leal lords, I promise a future we can be proud of, and to my enemies, I promise fire and blood, he said. Fire and blood, the lords replied, and he nodded as he turned and finally left. Dragonstone now. Fire and blood. The thought rang out in his mind as he flew high over King's Landing. Fire and blood, he heard Rhaenys say when she saw the ships underneath him. Jay soon found himself not thinking of Highgarden nor Dragonstone, and instead looking through Rhaenys's eyes as he saw the ships below. How many there were he couldn't tell, but his sister had stopped flying to Dragonstone, and now she was flying high over a port where there were countless ships and men surrounding it. Sovegon Rhaenys, Sovegon nejot no Valenten. Fly, Rhaenys, fly to our home, Crinuntisi. She. Londao henu jagonsida. Enemies, Jay. We cannot leave them. Sovegon, Lom, Juraelagon, Naejot Kivanon, Kivanon Separanabimagon. Fly, we need to plan, and then attack. Reluctantly, she did as he asked, and he felt Arthur sit up straighter behind him, the knight having heard his tone as he spoke to Rhaenys. Soon enough he could see Dragonstone itself, the island almost calling to them both. He saw the ships bearing House Valerian's silver seahorse, along with his own 3-headed dragon, the banner flying from the keep too. They landed on the cliffs, and after climbing down he walked to stand in front of his sister's head, her eyes staring into his mirroring, no doubt his own emotions. Go, Ray, enjoy. I'll be back to share with you later, he whispered softly. Promise me, little brother, she said. I promise, big sister, I promise, he said. He watched as she took to the sky and flew towards the dragon mound itself, closing his eyes when she was out of sight. He knelt and placed his hand on the grass. His father had walked here. He could feel it and was sure he'd seen it through Rhaenys' eyes. This had been where they'd played, and as he stood back up, he wiped the tear which had fallen. Now was not the time to be caught up in memories, though he knew he was only holding them at bay temporarily. We're in trouble, he said to Arthur as they walked toward the castle. My king? Arthur asked. A force. Arthur, a large one at Duskendale. I need to find out who they are and why they're there, he said. And Arthur nodded. They had almost reached the castle when the riders came, all bearing the silver seahorse, and he recognized Orain Waters leading the way. Your Grace, how? Orain asked, and Jay wondered how he'd not seen the dragon. A long story, Lord Orain. Perhaps one best suited for indoors, he said. The silver-haired man nodded, telling 3 of his men to give up their horses to them so they could ride back. The castle itself was just as he'd seen, and each step he took inside of it made it feel so much more real. They entered after walking past dragons made of stone, and through doors that were adorned by dragons, hinges, the stone itself. Everywhere he looked, he was surrounded by them. Entering into the great hall, Jay smiled when he saw Lord Montfort look his way. "Your Grace, Dragonstone is yours," Lord Montfort said, and as one, all the men in the room knelt. "Rise, my lords, please, Lord Montfort. May we speak alone? The chamber of the painted table?" he asked, and the lord nodded. He barely heard the lord speak to Arthur, though he could hear how shocked Montfort was by what Arthur was saying. Jay, though, was far more concentrated on his surroundings. When he saw the table, his hands, almost of their own accord, moved over it, stroking it before he moved to the raised seat. Looking to Arthur, he saw the knight nod, and so he climbed up and looked down at the table, feeling a shiver run down his spine as he did so. "Your Grace, forgive me, but what Sir Arthur says, it cannot be true, surely," Montfort said, taking him from his thoughts. "Forgive me, my lord. Long have I wished to sit in this seat and look at this view," he said, and Montfort nodded. "A force, my king, Sir Arthur says numerous ships have landed," Montfort asked. "Aye, Sir Arthur speaks true, Duskendale. An army has landed, and one I have no idea of the origin of." "I am unaware of any army, your grace. We arrived here hoping to take Lord Stannis into our custody only to find he'd already left. So we secured the island for you and have been awaiting your orders." Montfort said, his voice a little shaky. "You've done excellent work, my lord. The army, and who they are, is mine to worry about. I thank you for this, Lord Montfort, truly. To have my family home secured is more than I could have expected at this time. I am in your debt." "You're welcome, your grace," Montfort said. "I'll speak to you and the other lords later this evening. My lord, perhaps a room could be readied for me and a place to wash up." He said and waited until the lord had left. "Laura's the door. No one enters," he said as he closed his eyes and went looking for the door he needed. He found the gull flying over the town and looked down to see the men below, flying to a nearby ledge. He landed and looked on as the army set up camp. Their armor was expensive and inlaid with elaborate designs. The men wore jewels, and he saw the golden rings on their arms. The gull took flight once more, and it flew over horses and even larger beasts, elephants. Jay believed, though he'd never seen one before. It was when he saw the golden banners, though he was certain who the men were, when he flew to the golden tent and saw the pikes. The gilded skulls placed on them leaving him in no doubt. Jay took the gull up higher, and he looked much closer. The army was too close to the city, the danger to the people too much to risk. He severed the connection and let the gull fly free as he opened his eyes. "The Golden Company," he said while Arthur looked at him in shock. Pike 297 AC. Theon. He had reaved, raped, and sailed the seas for over 2 years. He'd been bloodied on the sea and seen men of his crew die and be given to the drowned god. Yet not once had come close to his plan of taking a pinnacle ship and a Stark girl for a thrall. They'd looked at Bear Island more than once, even landed there one time, but there were far too many men for them to take. The trade was just too rich and too large for them, and unless they were willing to risk a large-scale attack, it just couldn't be taken. So he'd settled for easier fare, and found enough of it to build up a reputation for himself. His father was proud of him, his sister too, and thankfully his uncle had been banished, Euron still being the one man who scared him most. Now, though the fleet was gathered, and war seemed to be on the agenda, something his father had been promising for years. For Theon, he'd stopped listening when Balon spoke. He no longer believed what his father said, or that the old ways were returning. That the Ironborn would take the Greenlands for their own, he'd heard it for so long that now it just washed over him like a wave. "I received a raven from the stag who sits the throne," Balon said as the hall quietened. "Apparently we have his permission to reave." "Who does he think he is?" "I need no Greenlander's permission. I say we fuck the stag and his golden-haired cunt of a wife. Maybe I'll take her as my salt wife." Theon laughed as the voices rang out around the room. He looked to Asha, who wasn't laughing though. His sister had a much different look on her face. She was focused on her father, who wore a cruel smile and who got ready to speak again. Aye, we're reavers, and no one tells us when to reave, but it's the rest of the note I find most interesting. The royal fleet has stood down, war is upon them, and he wishes us to fight his enemies. The north, the reach, and the west all have risen and all have marched to war. What does this mean for us? I'll not fight a Greenlander's war. I say we fuck 'em all. The laughs were even louder now. Theon, though, like his sister, was now looking at his father, the ideas flying around in his mind. The armies of the Greenlanders march, and behind them they leave lands to reave. So reave we will, not for any stag king, but for our own king, for Balon Greyjoy, the king of the Iron Islands. Victarion said, moving forward, the Iron King, the Iron King. By the third one, he was shouting as loud as others as he realized what this meant. He spent the rest of the night speaking to other captains, and was annoyed. He only found 2, but 2 would be enough. He was called in with Asha to speak to his father, and found him looking over maps, waiting for them both. Theon a little put out that it seemed Asha had been called before he had, but still he smiled at his sister and walked to stand by her when his father noticed him. Good, come look both of you, Balon said. The North, father? Asha said, not sounding very happy. Aye, the West has those damnable ships, and after what Victarion said one did to his men, I'll not send us up against them, not yet. Balon said, What do you wish of me, father? He asked, and Balon smiled at him. Victarion will take Moghedien Caelan once the Northmen have crossed into the south. Asha, this, Balon said, pointing to deep wood. Moti, Theon, you want to take on the she-bears, then? That's where you'll go. Wait until that ship is docked and bring it to me. I will, father, he said, smiling as he knew he'd get more ships now. We'll show them all, first the north, then the west and the reach. What is dead may never die, Balon said, but rises again harder and stronger. Both he and Asha said at the same time. His father nodded and called for his uncle, and he and Asha walked from the room. His sister still not looking pleased. He sat down and began to drink when his sister sat down beside him, clearly wishing to say something, though it took some time for her to speak. This is madness, she said after a few moments. Is it? We'll show the Greenlanders who we are. Asha, they know who we are. Theon, and last time we did that I lost 2 brothers, Asha said. Worried about me, sister, he said with a laugh. I'm worried about us all, Theon, she said as she stood up and walked away. He shook his head when she'd done so, enjoying the looks he got from the girl carrying the ale and grabbing her when she walked over. After spending the night taking his pleasure from her, he left early the next morning, quickly readying the ship for the journey ahead. 4 other captains came to him, and he was happy enough with that. 6 ships were more than enough to take Bear Island. Looking around Lordsport, he could see the full might of the Iron Fleet ready to set off. Soon they'd be in the north, and he wished he could be there to see Stark's face when he found out his precious north had been attacked. As the sea bitch set sail, though he wished even more that he could see Ned Stark's face when he found out that Theon had taken his daughter, his precious wild wolf. The Stormlands, 297 AC, Oberyn. He joined up with the majority of the Dornish army after landing in Weil. Blackmont, Euronwood, Dane, Fowler, Corgoyle, Uller, over 8,000 spears and 6,000 cavalry had marched. As they reached Blackhaven, they were joined by some houses of the Stormlands who'd come to Jay's side. Oberyn was happy to see Beric and Thoros ride to his side, more so to see young Ned Dane. The other lord he didn't recognize, but soon found out he was the Lord of Harvest Hall. The Bold's great nephew had risen for the king his grand uncle served. My lords, he said as he and Alaria's father Harmon, Frankly Fowler, Quentin Corgyle, and Anders Yarnwood rode out with him to meet them. Prince Oberyn, you rose for his grace? Beric said with a note of surprise in his voice. I rose for my nephew, as have you and Lord, he asked, looking to the Bold's kin. Lord Arstan, my prince, the young man answered. Does his grace have a plan? Thoros asked, and Oberyn asked them to dismount and pulled out a map. The Stormlords ride to Robert's side. We're to see they don't make it. We're to keep them here while the king's armies deal with the Vale and with Robert himself. He said, being far more pleasant about the stag than he wished to be. They mass at Storm's End under Lord Stannis, my prince, though they may have begun to march by now. Beric said, pointing to the map in the King's Road, which would lead them to where Robert and Jon Arryn would seek to meet up. Oberyn was surprised at that. He'd have thought that they may seek to raid the Reach, but it just proved just how badly off they were for men. Still, they had a long march ahead of them, and it was best they were on their way. If they could stop them before they reached the King's Road, then they could at the very least bog them down here. A victory itself was possible, certain if the forces from the Reach arrived, and he'd no doubt they would. Jay having explained this to him one night, as they sat speaking over their plans for war. Oberyn, though, would need to do his part, and by the looks of it, he would not be alone. I intend to place Randall Tarley in charge of the Reach army, Uncle. I can't have Lord Mace do what he did during the rebellion. I need someone who will march to my orders and come when called or needed. Tarley is a good man, Jay, but we must take the Stormlords off the table. Will Dorne fight with Reachmen, Uncle? They will for you, nephew. So he ordered the march and spoke to Beric, the Lord bringing a further 1,000 men, half of them horse, while Arstan brought another 800, 300 of them mounted also. Infantry-wise, they'd have the numbers. Dornish spears would form up and nullify any charge, while his own cavalry and the 2 Stormlords would take the fight to Stannis' horse. They passed Summerhall after a week, and soon they saw the Kingswood in the distance. He sent some scouts into the woods themselves, and had them ride to House Fellwood to see if they'd already raised their banners. Glad to find they had, as he removed them from their backs. Other scouts he sent towards Storm's End, and the news they brought him back made him happy. The Stormlords had not managed to march just yet, and so it was there they rode. The sight they presented a strange one indeed, and soon they saw the large, imposing keep in the distance. Oberyn looked around, and found high ground to set up camp. Outriders had no doubt seen them, and he smiled at that. Soon Stannis would know, and they'd be more cautious in their march. While it may mean there would be no battle, still serve their purpose all the same. We'll parley on the morrow, my lords. It's time for you to enjoy some Dornish hospitality, he said to Beric and Arstan, the 2 lords nodding before leaving to set up their own tents. Though his men preferred to fight, they posted pickets and placed stakes in the ground. They'd not be surprised, even though he expected Stannis to fight with honor. Were Robert he faced, he'd worry more about his tactics, expect the attack to come before they parleyed. Stannis, though he knew, would come and see him, speak to him, try to get him to stand down before doing what needed to be done. Oberyn felt his blood begin to tingle as it always did before a fight. He ate, drank a little, and then went to his bed alone, wishing Ilaria was with him and yet glad she was not. He woke early the next morning and broke his fast with the Dornish lords, listening to reports from his own outriders and readying for the day. His armor was more heavy than normal, his spear sharper, and as he mounted his horse he asked Beric and Arstan to stay back. He wished them to be the surprise that Stannis wasn't expecting. Once he was satisfied they would do as he asked, he rode out to meet with the brother of the man that was as much responsible for Elia and the children's deaths as any. Finding a large part of him, hoped a battle would come this day. House Massey. 297 AC, Tristan. He had looked over the ravens, and it galled him, the nerve of the man. His cousin killed, beheaded, and they wished him to fight for the man who'd carried out the sentence. Did they not know he'd have received this news? Did they not care? Did they not think the truth of what they did to Justin would matter to him? Yes, his cousin had committed a crime, and for that he deserved punishment. But would not the wall have sufficed? To be beaten, tortured, unmanned, and then beheaded. What kind of a man would he be if he was then to fight on the king's side? What kind of a man did they take him for? So he had refused the call, and damn the consequences. Only for another raven to come, this one offering them the chance to see his cousin avenged. A Targaryen king called, and his house had long been supporters of the dragons, even more so than they had ever been the stags. Tristan had looked at the map and sought a way to make it to the king's men, to join up for justice for his kin, and to see a true king on the throne once more. At first he had despaired when the final raven had arrived, Stannis demanding he march and warning him what was to happen if he failed to do so. Then the letter had come, and it was that he held in his hands as they had set off towards Storm's End. That letter he looked at now, as he saw the army in front of him. Lord Tristan, His Grace offers you the chance to seek justice for Sir Justin, to bring your arms to bear against the usurper who took your cousin's life. March. But march slowly, and when you're close to Storm's End, you'll see the opportunity that presents itself. Renew your fealty to House Targaryen, my lord, and by doing so you'll have the justice you seek. Sir Richard Lonmouth. That the letter was signed by a man long thought dead gave him pause. But then the king was thought dead also, was he not? House Targaryen was thought dead, and it was not. Now, as he rode under a white flag toward the Dornishmen, he felt nervous and yet excited, and more of the latter when he saw other Stormlords there as well. Lord Beric, Lord Arstan, he said as he dismounted. Lord Tristan, what brings you here? Beric asked, his voice neutral, but his expression wary. I came to pledge to the king, Lord Beric, to fight for him against those who killed Justin, for justice, and to seek a true king crowned, he said. And after being given bread and salt, he was taken to a tent where they were joined a little later by the Red Viper himself. As he mounted up later that day and looked to the men around him, he raised his lance and readied for the order to charge. The smile on his face was beaming, even though he knew he may not live through this day, and when the order came he heard the shouts ring out. For Prince Oberyn, for King Jaehaerys, his own loudest of all, for Sir Justin Massey, he shouted as the charge began. Storm's End, 297 AC, Stannis. Almost 15,000 men he'd gathered, half horse, and yet some of the Stormlords hadn't risen, and it both angered and worried him. He'd sent more ravens and knew he could wait no longer. They'd need to march and march soon, and he only hoped the others would join on the way. He was about to settle down for dinner when Courtenay came running, the man having a worried look on his face being something of a surprise. Sir Courtenay, he asked, standing up. My lord, you must come, an army, Sir Courtenay said, and as the man moved to the door, Stannis thought he must have heard him wrong, as he swore the man had said Dornish spears. It didn't take too long to find out that he'd heard the man speak true. Standing on the parapets, he looked out and saw an army in the distance, one his outriders began pouring in to tell him was led by the Red Viper himself. That they bore the flag of the three-headed dragon confused him. That they were here at all confused him. And so he stopped trying to make sense of it, and instead concentrated on what he needed to do. They seek a parley, my lord, Lord Errol said. Aye, my lord, on the morrow. Lord Estermod added, Then we'll parley, ready the men, my lords. Ready them, for I fear we fight on the morrow. He said and watched as the lords went running. Sir Davos a moment. My lord, Davos said, staying back when the other left. I brought my family here thinking they'd be safe. Sir Davos, these walls won't be breached, and my brother, though not as prepared as I was on Dragonstone, has seen there is plenty of food stocked, a year's worth I'd wager, he said. Plenty, my lord. We should have won the war by then, Davos said. And though he was trying to be reassuring, it had the opposite effect. I fear not, sir. I must ask another favor of you, Davos, he said, and Davos looked to him and nodded. Should things go badly, should this castle be besieged, if I should fall, then I ask you to take them from here, Sir Davos, Selyse, Shireen. Take them and sail. Essos, to Selyse's family. Wherever, if I fall, I'd see them in your care, sir. My lord, you honor me, Sir Davos said. No, sir. I burden you. You cannot bite with me. Sir Davos, go to your ship and await news. If it comes to it, then see my wishes done, he said as he turned to look at the papers on his desk. You can count on me, my lord, Davos said as he walked away. Thank you, Davos, for everything, he said softly. His voice barely a whisper. He rode out the next morning with a number of his lords, Estermont, Swan, Connington, and Buckler, while behind him men readied in case it came to a battle, something he felt it surely would. Still, he was prepared to offer terms to Oberyn Martell, and yet he wondered if he was truly in a position to do so. The Dornish party was colorfully dressed, the prince riding at the front, Lord Stannis. Oberyn said as the horses came to a stop no more than a few feet from each other. Prince Oberyn, I had not thought to see you here, he said, looking at the man. My nephew called and Dorne answered. Did you think we'd forgiven your family for what you did to ours? Oberyn said. Nephew, a bastard wolf you claim a nephew, Lord Estermont said, and Stannis glared at the man. 4 and 10 years ago your brother and Jon Arryn rose upon lies that they knew the truth of Lord Stannis. They used these lies to place a usurper on a throne which by rights was my nephew's. Over the bodies of our family, Elia Martell, Rhaenys Targaryen, and Aegon Targaryen, your brother declared himself king. Now they seek to keep that throne by lying once more. Jaehaerys Targaryen is the true-born son of Rhaegar and Lyanna Targaryen, and he offers you these terms, Oberyn said. Terms you dare, Lord Errol said, and Oberyn laughed. I offer you nothing but a sharpened spear. My lord, my nephew is a far better man than I. Stand down, my lord, stand down, and House Baratheon under your stewardship will keep its position. It will remain Lord Paramount of the Stormlands, and you and your wife and child, along with any Stormlord who doesn't rise, will receive no punishment. Oberyn said, and Stannis looked at him and ground his teeth. Your bastard king offers me what is ours, by right, what is not in his power to give. So I offer you these terms in return, my prince. Ride back to Dorne, and we'll forget this mistake of yours, this error of judgment. Ride back, and my brother and I will seek no retribution, for ours is the fury, my prince, and you do not want to face it this day. Stannis said to nods from his lords, Then I've received my answer. Noon, my lords, Oberyn said before looking up at the sky. The ravens will eat well this day. I wonder what they'll think of Stag. Oberyn laughed as he rode off. Back at the keep, it was chaos as he ordered his men to prepare for battle. They were at a disadvantage, but he needed to break out. Robert was marching the wrong way for him, and they needed to break this army here. You have your orders, he said to the lords as he walked from the room down to Shireen's rooms, his daughter sitting by the window staring out at the sea. Father, she said, running to hug him, and even though he stiffened, he placed his hand on her shoulders, feeling her hug him tighter. I must march, Shireen. There will be a battle here this day. Sir Davos awaits. Listen to him. Do as he says. Promise me, he said, looking at her scarred face and feeling the failure he always did when he did so. I will. Must you fight, father? Shireen asked. I must. You are the future of our house. Shireen and I could not be prouder of you even were you a son, he said as she hugged him again, and he walked from the room, unable to look back. He bid Selyse farewell and told her of Davos, and as he walked the corridors of his family keep, for a moment he considered the offer the king had made, for he knew now that Jon Snow was who he claimed to be. He could choose not to fight and save many lives this day, see his daughter grow old with her birthright intact, yet he knew he would not. His duty was to his brother, to his king, to his family, and as he placed the helm on his head and mounted his horse, he rode to join his men in the battle he must fight. The Battle of Storm's End, 297 AC, Adrek. The arrows rained down as they charged, and he felt his courser's pain as she was hit before he knew it, though he was rolling across the ground. He stumbled to his feet, and around him could see the carnage. It had been stupid to charge uphill, and he wondered how Stannis had fallen into this trap, or was it even Stannis who had? His lord had been given command of the cavalry, and as Patrick watched the Dornish spears take care of those who'd made it up the hill ahead of him, he felt that had been a mistake. He drew his sword and waited for the infantry charge, looked back to see if their own had moved, and what he saw filled him with fear. There were Stormland's colors attacking their own, along with the Dornish cavalry. Houses which should have been on their side that had clearly turned their cloaks, and a day which they had felt so confident of winning, soon looked to be heading to an inevitable defeat. The Red Viper is no commander, a great warrior true, but no commander. Lord Stannis beat the fucking Ironborn at sea. He'll destroy the Dornish on land. We are Stormlanders. What fear we Dornish spears? The bravado had been big around the camp the previous night, even if it was only those too green to have faced battle who spoke that way. The others, the men who'd fought in the rebellion, they remembered Ashford and the Battle of the Bells as much as they remembered the 3 victories in one day, as much as they remembered the Trident. They spoke far differently about Dornish spears, and bemoaned the fact that this time, even if they won here today, soon would have to face men they had once called allies. Patrick looked on as the Dornish spears came his way, looking around to see knights get to their feet and lances being discarded. He moved to a group of men who looked stunned to have been unhorsed, men who'd not drawn their weapons and were instead standing around as if they'd not a care in the world. Moving towards them, he began to shout. Though it was too late, the horses came from the side and the men were soon run down. I need to get back to the line, he thought as he began to move. To others, it would look as if he was deserting, running away and being a coward. But Patrick knew that out here on this field he was a dead man. His only chance to live, to fight, was to join up with whatever remained of their forces, and so he ran, his armor heavy and slowing him down. He ran. When he saw what he'd ran to, he felt the despair hit home, so much so that he stopped and welcomed the darkness when it came, not a moment later. It was 2 days later when he woke. The tent was full of men just like he, that had been injured and not killed. Looking down at himself, he expected to see more injuries, yet he was intact, his arms, his legs, still attached. The pain in his head was dull, and as he focused at the others around him, he saw how lucky he was. You're awake, he heard a voice say, and he looked to see a man, we thought a Stormland lord. Aye. We lost? The man asked. Aye, he replied and lay back down on the makeshift bed, wondering what the Dornish did to prisoners. Oberyn. He had picked his ground well and was pleased to find on his return to camp that he had gained more men while he was away. Though given what they'd done to the man's cousin, he could see why Massey had turned. Going over his plans with his lords, he could sense their eagerness for the battle, something that while he too felt, he worried about also. With luck, they'll attack us and leave us free to counter. But should they not, I want your men here and here, he said, pointing to the map. My prince. Shouldn't we be in the main cavalry force? Varric asked. No, it's far better they see you and the other Stormlands lords last. It'll break their spirit to see that it's not just Dorne they fight this day, Oberyn said. Anders, you take the infantry, ready them in a spear wall, and march only when the cavalry is done with, he said to Lord Euronwood. My prince, Anders replied. Franklin, you're with me. We break their archers, and then join with the rest of the cavalry here, he said, pointing to the map. My prince, Lord Fowler said with a smile, after telling his daughters where to be if they were winning and also in the event that they were losing. He dressed in his armor and kissed each of them before he mounted up and ready to ride. He left Harmon in charge of their cavalry's main body and moved to ready for their own attack. As they sat on the hill looking down, though he began to laugh, riding his horse across the line, he gave the orders to the archers to begin to fire. What fool had Stannis put in charge of his cavalry? He wondered as the sky filled with arrows. Riding back to his men, they began their own movement, their ride far more purposeful. He had seen where Stannis's archers were, and in the chaos of an overly aggressive attack, they were his for the taking. His men were riding now, spears doubling as lances raised, and they cut through the line easily. The horses rode hard, and he felt the bones of men break under his stallion. When they stopped to turn, he wiped the blood from his eyes, the splashes as his spear had cut through men having almost completely covered his helm. Ride, join our brothers, he shouted, and they began once again. His spear cut through men easily, his horse moving swiftly amongst the throng of Stormlanders as if this was the deserts of Dorne and she was on a pleasure ride. How many men he killed he didn't know, but he faced no true competition this day, and he wondered how it had been so easy. Looking to the sky, he saw the bird flying over the field, the eagle taking everything in, and he wondered if his nephew was looking down on him, Martell. He heard a voice shout out, and he turned to see a large man standing with a sword. "Martell, come face me, and I'll send you back to that whore of yours," the man said. And Oberyn rode towards him. "Sir Godry wishes to feel my spear. Well, who am I to deny a man what he asked for so eloquently?" Oberyn said to loud laughs from his men. He jumped from his horse and looked at the large man, the greatsword in his hands ready to be swung. Soon they'd attracted a crowd, and Oberyn knew then the day was theirs. Smiling, he spun his spear when he saw his girls, all three of them unharmed, and he began to spin as he attacked the large man. Godry was slow and cumbersome, his plate being the only thing which had saved him up to now. Oberyn thought as he brought the spear down on the man's shoulder. "I'll gut you, Martell. They'll call me the Prince's Lair," Godry said when Oberyn feigned tiredness. He waited until the man came in close, and then he moved, spinning away from the greatsword when it came down and hit the ground he'd just been standing on. The strike he aimed in return hit home, and he caught the man just under the arm, the greatsword crashing to the ground. Moving fast and behind the knight, he took his legs, and as Godry fell to the ground, he thrust his spear down under the exposed gorget. He pushed it in deep and heard the pain sounds as Godry began to choke on his own blood. "It's a pity you're not a worthier foe, Faring, for now you're dead. I'll still only be known as the Red Viper," Oberyn said as the man breathed his last. He looked around at the field, upset to see Dornish men dead or dying. Yet they'd won the day and suffered far less losses than they could have. Looking to the sky, he saw the bird flying overhead, and he smiled as he walked to his daughters, eager to find out their own stories, and to speak to his lords and find the extent of their victory. Stannis, what had the fool done? He had given strict orders, and the man had charged with his entire cavalry. Stannis, like his other lords, looked on in horror as the arrows flew, as men and horse fell, and any hope he had of winning this day ended. They had already been at a disadvantage in terms of position, if not one of men also. Still, his plans were sound. The Dornish wouldn't siege, they'd march, and if Stannis didn't press his attack, they would. Sir Aemon was a better man than this, a wiser man and the right choice to lead his cavalry, and yet he just wasted them in a pointless charge. His day was soon to get worse, though, as he heard the attack on his own archers, and didn't have the men or horse to protect them now. Stannis rallied his infantry as best he could, readied them for Oberyn's own cavalry to attack, but even this didn't go as he'd hoped. The cavalry which came first bore Stormland's colors, and his men lowered their guard. His screaming voice not enough to get them to realize these were not friends this day. By the time the Dornish cavalry charged, his lines were broken, and his army was on the verge of being routed. He needed to rally, and so he rode, gathering as many men as he could. He rode and soon found himself matching lance against spear with Dornishmen. "Take them down, men. For the Stormlands, ours is the fury," he shouted as he rode through and turned to do so again, though he had far fewer men than he had set out with, and another charge would end any hopes he had. He looked out on the field and bowed his head, calling riders to him and sent them off, telling them to tell the men to retreat, to order them to retreat. The day was lost, and if he didn't move soon, then so was his army. Before he could ride once more through the Dornish cavalry came, the infantry marching behind them, and Stannis looked to the few men he had with him. "I thank you all," he said as he turned his horse, and along with the 50 or so men he had left, he rode into the sea of Dornish spears. His sword swung down on yet another man, his horse long since dead, and around him he'd fought down to 2 or 3 men. His 50 had killed thrice their number, yet it was all for nothing as the men kept coming. Though for now it wasn't men he faced as the 3 ladies moved around him, They were tiring him out as he tried to get to them, and he knew they were playing with him. "I thought you'd be better, Stag," a woman's voice called out. Furious. Another. "Demon of the Trident, they called your brother. What name would they give you?" Another said. Stannis lashed out and felt it then. The whip coiled around his feet, pulling him to the ground. He felt the crash of the spear as it hit his helm and heard the voice as his sword fell. "Best keep him alive, Obara," the woman said. "Father will wish to speak to him," another said. "Very well," the last one said, and he barely saw the spear as it was raised. He was tired, beaten, and soon he welcomed the darkness that unconsciousness brought to him. The hope then filled his heart that perhaps he'd see his wife and daughter once more.